Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
After rounds in the surgical ward, procedures were scheduled. The young nurse Isabella was spinning like a madwoman. Patients were coming into the procedure room one by one. Who was going to get stitches removed? Who was going to be treated? Who was going to get shots? She filled a syringe with medicine. Suddenly, everything went blurry in front of her eyes. The girl instinctively grabbed the edge of the table, almost falling. The patient, an elderly woman, managed to hold her up. "Isabella, what's wrong? Are you all right? Should I call the head nurse? You've got no face on you. You're white as a sheet." The girl leaned on the table, rubbed her forehead with a napkin, inhaled the alcohol, shook her head and came to her senses. "Excuse me," she said. "No, I don't need to call anyone. Olivia will scold me. It's okay now. It's just that I'm pregnant. It happens to me sometimes. I went to the doctor, and he says it's nothing. It'll pass. Turn around like this. Doesn't it hurt? That's it. You've been treated. Let's get your stitches out now." "Oh, congratulations then. Babies are always a joy. Would you like some little cucumbers? My sister-in-law brought me some yesterday, pickled in a barrel, so spicy." Isabella's mouth watered. She finished her treatment and rushed to room 5. She ate 3 cucumbers with great pleasure. "I feel better," she thanked the patient. "Cucumbers are great. Nothing tastes better. You've just saved me. And since morning I was groggy. Thank you. I'm going to get back to work." The woman laughed. "You're welcome, my dear. May God grant you an easy childbirth. You're a good girl, kind-hearted. You have a heart for the sick." Isabella was really happy lately. After all, her biggest dream had come true. She was pregnant. Before that, there were 2 miscarriages, long treatment, nerves, discord on this ground with her husband. And the mother-in-law added fuel to the fire. They said that my son chose a pacifier, cannot give birth. The critical first 3 months were over. Now Isabella believed that she would bear the baby to the end, although she was still tormented and caught up periodically strong weakness. Her legs were shaking of their own accord. If they lived with her husband separately, Isabella would probably have gone on sick leave, rested once more. But her husband all the time at work, and the prospect of spending the days away with an obnoxious mother-in-law, who only did what life taught, was just unbearable. And at work did not particularly pity those who often took sick leave. Hands were always in short supply. There was a lot to do. After the shift, Isabella went to the neighboring department for an ultrasound. She was happy. The sex is already visible. It will be a boy. Her husband dreamed of a son. There's a reason to have a celebratory dinner. Isabella ran on the way home to the store, bought a cake, various ingredients for salads, and got down to business. Good, at least mother-in-law was in the garden and did not interfere. By the time her husband arrived, the table was set. Justin was very surprised. The mother-in-law, unkindly, and Isabella announced, "Everyone, please join the table. I had an ultrasound today. Honey, we're having a baby boy. There's nothing wrong with the baby, so I thought I'd celebrate." My husband blossomed. He said yes. "So it's going to be a boy. I love you so much. It's not a bad thing to have a drink to celebrate. Well, put on your masterpieces. I'll taste it. I'm starving. By the way, my dear, I forgot to tell you, I have to go on a business trip tomorrow for a couple of days. Our components are stuck. I'll have to take care of it. Get my bag ready, will you? I don't need a lot of stuff, just a couple of fresh shirts and some underwear." Isabella got upset, pressed up against her husband, pouted her lips. "Well, I don't play like that. I don't want you to go. I'll miss you. No, we'll miss you and your son." Her husband kissed her on the top of her head, stroked her tummy, pecked her on the nose. "I'll be back soon. I'm telling you, it's only a couple days. And I'll miss you too. You and Mom pick apples. We need to cut them for drying and make jam." My mother-in-law was silent before, but now she intervened and sarcastically replied, Aha. How can you expect help from your daughter-in-law? Carries on with her pregnancy as if it is some kind of achievement. And I also gave birth, and nothing. I somehow managed to do everything, not like some people. Isabella almost cried, wanted to run to her room. She was so hurt. She wanted to have a heart-to-heart with her family, and once again, it hadn't worked out. Mother-in-law spoiled everything. But the husband gently replied to the mother, "I don't start, Mom. What's wrong with you? Again jealous or what? Stop nagging. Isabella's pregnant. You don't want to burden her. It's better to take care of her. Let's live together. I love you both, and I don't want to quarrel." The rest of the evening passed quietly. Laura went to her room and never showed her face again. But the mood was still hopelessly spoiled. Isabella was preparing her husband's things for a business trip, complaining to herself, and why only we took a loan, renovated the house. It would be better to take a separate apartment in the mortgage than to put up with these nagging all his life. The girl folded her husband's pants, checked his pockets, fumbled for some paper, pulled it out, and was stunned. It was a receipt from a jewelry store for a very impressive sum. A gold bracelet. Isabella rejoiced, so Justin decided to give me a gift, probably in honor of our long-awaited pregnancy. He's so quiet and doesn't say a word. And I wondered where he put his paycheck. He barely brings home anything. Then I should buy him something too, or it'll be embarrassing. I'll have to spend my personal savings. It's not much, of course, but enough for a chain. Isabella hid the check in her purse. The next day, she saw her husband off and went to the jewelry store. There were no people. Behind the counter stood the same young woman, obligingly offering one thing or another, but the prices were simply cosmic. The woman sighed, looking for something within her means. The seller clearly wanted to communicate and asked, "Girl, yes, you say, what are you looking for? For yourself or as a gift? And what amount do you expect? We have now promotions. I'll pick up something interesting for you. Don't hesitate to ask. I will be happy to advise you." Isabella took out the check and handed it to the salesman. But here's the thing. Isabella handed the salesman the check and said, "Yesterday my husband bought a gold bracelet for me. Probably wants to make a surprise. I found the check in his pocket, so I thought I'd get him something too. I can't decide. I don't have much money. Your prices are a bit steep." The seller looked at the check and suddenly changed in her face, blinked, and then said, "I shouldn't tell you this, of course, it's none of my business. But I remember this man, only he was not alone, but with some woman, obviously older than you. Expensive clothes. She looked like a wealthy lady. Well, he put the bracelet on her arm right away. So he didn't buy it for you. Maybe it's a relative of yours. Although they were just acting like a couple in love. I apologize again." Isabella turned pale. She felt sick. She felt a sharp pull in her lower abdomen. She sighed and sank to the ground, her mind racing with only one thought. So Justin has a mistress. What about me? What about our family and the baby? Could he really do this to me? The saleswoman was thrashing around, calling an ambulance, cursing herself for her long tongue. The medics arrived quickly and immediately took the patient to the ward. She was in danger of miscarriage. Isabella sobbed. She was so afraid of losing the baby. She was choking on resentment. She called both her husband and her mother-in-law. Justin never picked up, but her mother-in-law promised to come. The attending physician, Arnold, shook his head and tried to get through to the patient. "Isabella, stop crying. You can't get upset. You have a history of 2 miscarriages. You're in a precarious position. You need to stay positive and keep the pregnancy alive. But what's wrong? Why did you have a crisis?" The girl sobbed and told me everything. She couldn't keep it all inside. The doctor urged her on. "Wait a minute, maybe it'll clear up. It seems like a misunderstanding. Things happen. All you have to think about right now is the baby. He's feeling everything too." Arnold continued. Don't you understand? You feel bad and he feels bad. My grandmother taught me how to make potions. I'll bring you a potion that's completely safe for the fetus. It'll calm you down a bit, strengthen your immune system. Now calm down, rest. I'll be back to see you again." Isabella tried to chase away bad thoughts and fell asleep. Her mother-in-law woke her up, rattling dishes and putting out home-cooked food. When she saw that her daughter-in-law was awake, she began to ask about everything. "What else has happened to you? Woe is me. All I have is sores. The wind blows, and you're already sick." The woman cried again. She was so hurt. Instead of sympathy, again reproaches, as if she was always guilty of something. The girl spoke out with irritation. "And you ask your son. It turns out he has a mistress. He gives her gold bracelets. And he doesn't need a wife. And he doesn't want a child either. Where is he now? Why isn't he picking up the phone?" Laura was stunned. "What mistress? It can't be. Are you eating that? Come on before the dumplings are not cold. And do not take bad things into your head. And I'll find out everything. I'll come back tomorrow. My son can't have done such a bad thing. It's a misunderstanding." Isabella ate a little. Black thoughts did not let her go. She sent her husband probably 100 messages, flooded him with questions, demanded explanations, but he never answered. That made it all the more disturbing. Laura was terrified too. She certainly wasn't thrilled with her sister-in-law, though she was a bit of a bore, always sick. What kind of woman is that? Still, she thought it was better for her son to be married and under her care than to go back to a life of debauchery. She raised Justin alone without a husband. She gave birth late, as they say, for herself. Laura didn't do well with men. She was a good-looking, stately woman. She held a responsible position at the enterprise, the head of the sector. But men all shunned her, even afraid to get involved. Her character was too bossy. Therefore, when the woman was 35, she realized there was no further pull. Specially invited one acquaintance to her place. They had a brief affair. Laura safely got pregnant, and he disappeared, as he turned out to be married. She adored her son. He became the meaning of her life. Justin was allowed everything. There were no restrictions, and it played a cruel joke on him in his youth. The guy lost his head from permissiveness, tried cigarettes and alcohol. It almost came to drugs, and how many girls he fooled cannot count. That's when Laura came to her senses, but it was too late. She didn't know what to do. Her son barely finished university and suddenly brought home this girl and announced that he had fallen in love and would marry. However, he settled down, found a normal office job in a private company, and got smart. Laura exhaled. That's why she tolerated her daughter-in-law, even though she didn't like her. It was Laura who wanted the young couple to have a child as soon as possible. She thought that this way her son would definitely become attached to home and family, and everything seemed to happen just like that. And now some mistress. Mother-in-law was outraged, decided to call her son and clarify everything immediately. She gave him a hard time. "Son, why don't you answer Isabella's calls? Do you even know that your wife is in the hospital? She's in danger of miscarriage? Why don't you come clean with your mother right now? Are you really having an affair? I can't believe you would do such a despicable thing." Isabella's been crying nonstop. "I don't know what to say. What the hell is going on?" Justin realized there was no point in lying, so he shocked his mother even more. "It's true. Mom, here's the thing. My boss, Jessica, has taken a shine to me. She's the daughter of rich parents. She has an expensive car, an apartment in the center. Every year, a couple of times abroad on vacation. One of her blouses is worth as much as my entire closet. I couldn't resist. She's hinting that I might be promoted to head of the department soon. It's such an opportunity. And Jessica's so well-groomed. You can't tell she's 5 years older than me. I've lost my head over her. I'm confused. And I feel sorry for Isabella. I realize she's pregnant, and I realize I've fallen out of love with my wife. It's a vicious circle." Laura's eyes immediately lit up with greedy fire. Everything her son had told her changed everything. Now she didn't care about that pathetic nurse. She was nothing but trouble, so the woman began to incite her son. "Oh, that's what it is. But if you've fallen out of love with your wife, you should divorce her. You can't sit on 2 chairs. Decided to build a career and achieve something in life. Act decisively. Make your boss become your second wife. You'll live happily all your life, instead of counting pennies from paycheck to paycheck." Justin was hesitating. I don't know how to talk to Isabella. She's already in the hospital. I don't think it's the right time. It's awkward, and I don't know about the baby. I don't know what to do. I really wanted him so badly. I begged my wife to have it, and now I realize how unfortunate all is. Mom has decided everything. Be brave. Your fate is being decided. Call your wife and tell her you filed for divorce and you love someone else. You're not the first, you're not the last, she'll get over it. No one has ever died of grief. And let Isabella decide about the baby. Don't worry, I'll take care of it myself. You're doing the right thing, son. You gotta make your way in life any way you can. You're gonna end up in poverty with that nurse. Justin didn't even realize what he was doing. Jessica had gotten him so wrapped up in his head. She knew her worth, demanded attention, and expensive gifts. It was like she was evaluating him and looking at him to see if he was worthy or not. The man went out of his way to please Jessica, giving her relaxing massages, bringing coffee to bed, calling her queen and goddess. Jessica didn't accept his advances. Compared to her, his wife seemed like such a naive simpleton. She was boring. Everything was predictable. Isabella wouldn't let go of the phone, even at night. She finally waited for her husband to call. She hoped to hear that he was worried, that it was all a lie, and that this nightmare would finally be over. But Justin spoke coldly, calmly and detachedly, like a robot. I'm sorry, Isabella. I've fallen in love with someone else, and I'm divorcing you. You'll have to find an apartment. You realize it's my house, so you'll have to move out. But don't get hysterical. I can't stand it. Just accept it and take it as it comes. The woman couldn't remember herself. Hysterical, you bastard. So it's true. What about our son? So you don't need him anymore. You're just throwing us out of your life like we don't need anything. How can you do that? You're going to hell. Justin blacked out. His conscience was eating away at him. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he'd already made up his mind that he wouldn't miss this chance to be rich and successful. No way. Isabella was barely brought to her senses, injected with a strong sedative. She fell asleep. The nurse cringed, talking to the doctor. Oh, I feel sorry for the patient. She's a fellow. She's a surgical nurse, too. She's a good girl, a hard worker. She's an orphan. But she didn't go downhill. She loved her husband so much. She was worried that she couldn't give birth. And what he did. I don't know how the poor thing could have lost that baby on a nervous breakdown. Arnold shook his head. He, too, felt terribly sorry for Isabella. Once Claire, a woman with sad blue eyes with such doom and pain in them that it was impossible to look at. A man complained. Why is it so unfair? Life takes children away from someone, and someone gives them up. How complicated everything is. And decided for himself that he would help this poor patient, would not leave her in distress. He couldn't do otherwise. That's not the way he was brought up. The doctor ordered him to forbid visits to Isabella in the 3rd ward. The indignant mother-in-law came running into his office. What's the matter? Why am I not allowed to see my daughter-in-law? I'm her relative. I have the right. I've moved all her things. The doctor replied sternly. Isabella had a nervous breakdown. Negative emotions are strictly forbidden. Leave your things here, I'll give them to her. And go away. As a doctor, I'm obliged to save a pregnancy that's hanging by a thread, and I forbid all contact. Is that clear? Isn't that a lot to take on? Do what you want. It's better that way. And tell her not to expect alimony. You don't know if it's someone else's child. Let her prove it's ours first. Arnold got angry and pushed the unpleasant woman out. She screamed and promised to complain. He once again sympathized with Isabella. Who did she have to live with? No one's psyche could take it. He sighed and went to check on his troubled patient. She was lying curled up and staring at a single point on the wall. Once again, the doctor's inside snapped. It was unbearable to watch her suffering. So he thought of something, sat down beside her and spoke softly. Good morning, Isabella. I see you're not crying anymore. That's good. I want you to listen to me carefully and not interrupt me. When I married Emily, I was only 20 years old. Both medical students. We were so in love, so passionate about our profession. We lived in a dormitory. Then we had our little boy, Austin. We bought a big house. We dreamed of having at least 3 children. My wife and I never once had a serious fight. I was a happy husband and father, and I thought I would always be. 3 years ago, my life was divided into before and after. Do you remember that massive accident when the bus driver fell asleep, failed to control himself, and flew into a ditch? It was all over the newspapers back then. More than 10 people died, including my wife and son. I was at karate training, and suddenly they were gone. Both of them died on the spot. I didn't want to live. I seriously considered suicide. No kidding. I thought I'd never get back into the profession. My hands were shaking and shaking. I couldn't operate. I was saved by a priest, a mentor, Father Frederick. He said that no one can choose his destiny and doesn't know what's in store for him. But everyone has a cross to bear, and one must carry it with dignity. And I'm carrying it, holding on, living, and you must. Especially since you have such a great incentive to live. Your baby. He is now fighting with you for the right to be born, and you ruin yourself in his hysterics. Forget about your cheating husband. Cut out of your life the people who hurt you so much, and move on with your life, and I'll help you. I'll look after you. Stephen, if you feel better when you're discharged, I'll take you in. No arguments. It's a big house, 4 rooms. You won't get in my way. On the contrary, maybe you'll get rid of the dreadful loneliness and the frighteningly empty rooms, and then we'll figure it out. Promise me you won't do anything stupid and you'll obey me. Okay? Isabella couldn't believe what she was hearing. She thanked him quietly. I sympathize with you very much, Arnold. How much grief and pain have you been through too? You lost your whole family. It's terrible. But you know you're right. I spite everyone will not break. I will endure everything and live for my son. I don't know how to thank you. I don't have any relatives, not even distant ones. You are the only person who took pity on me and gave me a helping hand. Do not think as soon as I give birth, I'll start to work part-time. I will not be a freeloader. I will help you around the house. Let's have your potion. It's not true. It makes me feel better. I don't feel sick anymore and I have an appetite. I promise I'll obey you in everything. You are like a father to me now, said Isabella. Arnold laughed at the comparison, but was pleased that the patient was at least a little cheerful. He sent Isabella for an ultrasound. Treatment was progressing well. The doctor was going to discharge her in a week. In the meantime, he was going to supplement her body with vitamins and provide complete rest. Isabella began to eat well. She drank well from the heat. She stroked her belly and dreamed of what her baby would be like. She tried not to think about her husband, though it was very hard for her. One day Arnold was summoned to the office of the superintendent, who began to shout. What do you think you're doing? Colleague, some dubious goods to patients handed out. On what grounds? And in general, I was informed that you have already set your eyes on this pregnant nurse, only around her and spin around. This is unacceptable behavior for a doctor. If this continues, I'll be forced to take extreme measures. Arnold was angry and realized exactly where the wind was blowing from. It was his fellow obstetrician Peterson. He was terribly jealous of Arnold, because women in labor were in line to him. So he tried to eliminate his rival by any means necessary. The accusations were far-fetched, so Arnold blurted out, I'm so sick of this. I'm working my ass off, taking extra shifts. I sit here 24 hours a day, and instead of gratitude I reprimands. You give me some paper and a pen. I'll leave. Arnold thought the superintendent would stop him from leaving, but he didn't, and so the leading obgyn was out of a job. Isabella was soon discharged, and she was taken by Arnold. The girl was very shy at first. Everything was so unfamiliar, and it was immediately felt that this house had not been inhabited by a woman for a long time. So the guests took over, and soon everything sparkled with cleanliness. The house shone. Arnold actively helped her and was surprised. Oh, how good it became. Thank you, Isabella. You're a model hostess. One thing depresses me. Where will I find a new job? I'm a doctor and I can't do anything else. Hey, what if I tried counseling patients at home? There's a surgeon in our surgical department who does that. It doesn't take much. It's not like you're going to perform surgery, just a checkup and a consultation. Everyone in town loves and appreciates you. I think it will work out, said Isabella. Arnold was enthusiastic. He quickly completed all the necessary paperwork and opened his office. To him willingly went to patients they knew. Arnold is a very good, knowledgeable specialist who was sure to give sound advice. Isabella also continued to work in the department. She was about to go on maternity leave. She and Arnold became very close. There was a strong sympathy between them, even tenderness. But the doctor was a decent man and did not overstep the boundaries of decency, although he sometimes very much wanted to press Isabella, hug, kiss. He became more and more attached to her and could not imagine how he had lived alone before, like a hermit. But there was nothing to say about her. For Isabella, this man was the closest person in the world, the most reliable. Now she realized that she had married the wrong man, that Justin did not truly love her. She was convenient. But as soon as a more promising bride appeared on the horizon, her husband, without hesitation, left her. Soon there was a court hearing on the divorce proceedings. Isabella was very nervous. She did not sit, she now and then went outside to breathe. Arnold was there, of course. How could he not be there for her at a time like this? Justin had prepared thoroughly and lied through his teeth. Your Honor, the house my wife and I lived in belongs to me. It was purchased before we were married. My wife never put a dime into it, so I'm keeping it. Isabella resented it, tried to object. Yes, but the loan is in my name, and we took it out to renovate the house, and we paid it off together in half. I also have the right to get some of the money back. And in general, my husband spent all his salary on his mistress. He brought home pennies. We lived on my money. How is it that I'll be left with nothing at all? But my husband, as if nothing had happened, continued to lie. It's not true. My wife took a loan and spent the money on herself, bought clothes and jewelry, let her pay it off herself. I used to bring home all my paychecks. Not only that, it's not my child, she fathered it. She even came today with her lover. It's a disgrace. Things were heating up. Isabella felt sick again. Arnold took her outside and urged her not to humiliate herself. Stop it. I cannot watch this balaganza. Let him choke on his house, and I'll help with the loan. That's even better. With such a scoundrel, it's better to cut off all relations at once. I think of the baby. Be careful. Your health is the most important thing right now. I'll always be there for you and I won't betray you. Even if you can't love me, I won't leave you. Isabella hugged him for the first time and, sobbing on his shoulder, replied, Yes, I have long loved you. You have done so much for me, so caring like no one else. I'm just so hurt. So many years I lived with my husband, was faithful to him, the family took care of, and he denigrates me in front of everyone. But you're right, as always. I'm not going to continue this disgusting scandal and leave with my head held high, no matter what it costs me. Isabella turned to the judge again and said, Your Honor, I agree. I don't want anything from this man. Just get this trial over with as soon as possible. In the end, Isabella was left with nothing after the divorce. But no matter how hard Justin tried to hide his conscience in the farthest corner of his soul, now it still made itself known. He was surprised at himself. He had started it all by himself, thinking that he had long ago fallen out of love with his wife. Now he saw her with another, and the blood in his veins boiled. Jealousy began to choke. I thought to myself, what are you doing? You're twisting and turning, lying. Trying to leave the mother of your child without a penny. What kind of a man are you, Justin? But he was even more angry and justified himself. It's not who I am, life is like that. I'm certainly not going to be lost. And Isabella has already found someone. She'll get over it somehow, Justin thought. Everyone walked out of the courthouse. Arnold walked up to Justin and said sharply, Remember, you lost the best woman in the world today, and I found her. I'd like to spit in your face or punch you in the face, but I won't. Life is a boomerang, and your betrayal will come back to you, but it'll be too late. Arnold took Isabella under his arm and led her to the car. The woman didn't even look back. Justin was repulsive to her now, repulsive to the point of shivering. She decided that she would cut him out of her life forever, and she would be happiest with Arnold. Justin rushed to Jessica's date, as if he were in a state of elation. He was carrying a divorce certificate. He carried a huge bouquet of her favorite white roses. In his pocket was a velvet box with a ring. The man had spent all his savings. He had to borrow from his mother to buy such luxury. But he was going all in and wanted to propose to his boss. Justin already saw himself in the chair of the head of the department and behind the wheel of an expensive car mistress, and her apartment had the most modern designer renovations. They agreed to meet at a restaurant. A table was booked in advance. Justin sat down at the table and waited. He was reciting the speech in his mind, a little worried. Finally, Jessica entered the hall, looking flawless as always, a confident gait and a haughty look. She smiled at Justin and began languidly. "Hi, my kitty. What are the flowers? Nice, my favorite roses. So let's have a menu. I'm starving. What should we start with? How about an avocado salad?" Justin called the waiter over, selected the entrees, and paired them with the wine that had been aged for years. He knew it would cost him money too, but he decided it was worth the gamble. They raised their glasses, drank, ate, and chatted. Justin decided it was time to act. He solemnly took out a box, opened it, and said, my darling, my sunshine. I can't live without you. Every minute I am waiting for our next meeting, and that's why I want you to become my wife. Marry me, I will surround you with care and attention. I'll throw the whole world at your feet, my queen." Jessica had been looking at the ring all this time and put it on her finger. She listened to her suitor to the end. Suddenly she laughed in his face and said some very hurtful and unpleasant things. "Listen to me, honey. Just because you and I sometimes sleep together does not mean that I want to marry you. And besides, I'm not at the age when I believe in fairy tales that you can give me something. My paycheck's not great, but this is a lovely ring. Thank you. I'd love to wear it. I love jewelry. I feel like I'm made for it. Anyway, let's not ruin such a lovely evening. We're having a good time together, and that's good enough for me. And let's stop all this wedding stuff. Let's have another drink." Justin's mood soured. He drained his wine glass in one gulp and tried to object. "Honey, but you promised that I'll go for a promotion if I behave well. I think I am much more worthy of the position of head of the department than Martin. Maybe it's time I got a promotion. I worked so hard for my little bunny." And once again, the woman has stunned him. "I don't understand. Are you sleeping with me just to get a promotion? What kind of blackmail? If you're not satisfied with our relationship, then goodbye. I'm not holding anyone back. Martin, for your information, is a great asset to me. He has the best sales figures in the department. Can you do that?" "Yeah, I have a headache. I'm going to call a cab. I'm going home. Ciao, I'll see you at work tomorrow." Justin was angry. They brought him a huge bill. He could barely scrape together the money to pay it, and he was racking his brains. How would he ever make it to his next paycheck? At home, he talked to his mother, waving his arms. "Can you imagine, that old hag cheated me? And she doesn't want to marry me. But she had the nerve to steal the ring, and I'm not going to get a promotion. Martin's doing a better job than me, you bastard. I spent all my money on her. Now I'm broke. What's the use? What's the point? I only left Isabella. At least I had a family, but now I'm alone." She also advised me. Laura couldn't take it anymore and got angry. "You're the one who made this mess. Nobody forced you to run away from your wife. I did my best, I tried my best. And now I'm a bad mother. What kind of a man are you that you can't get your boss's head on straight? Don't give up. Go for your goal. At least figure out how to frame this Martin guy to make yourself look better. You need to learn everything." So Justin listened to his mom again and decided to do something sneaky. He secretly stole Martin's important documents and burned them, framing him. Justin started talking about his promotion again. Jessica even almost agreed, but it was a misfire. It turned out that the clever Martin had long ago installed cameras in the office, and the footage showed Justin taking out folders with documents from the cabinet. A scandal broke out. Jessica was outraged and immediately kicked her lover out, especially since she was already fed up with him. He became insolent and demanding. The boss was not long alone and soon had an affair with another, more promising employee, quicker and younger. She didn't give a damn about Justin's fate. Jessica had been self-sufficient for a long time and didn't want to get married. She was satisfied with temporary favorites, just for fun and entertainment so she wouldn't get bored. From that day on, Justin had a hard time. He was mortified, crushed, humiliated. All his dreams of a career and a happy life melted and evaporated. He had betrayed and lost his family. Asking Isabella to come back was out of the question. She would never forgive him. And Jessica had literally wiped him clean and thrown him out. He was now a penniless, unemployed beggar, and his mother sat there and nagged him every day. The man could not stand it, broke down, began to drink without drinking every day, crawled home literally on all fours and went to bed clothed. So he forgot all his problems, and his conscience fell asleep. And in the morning there was a heavy hangover, and everything repeated in a circle. He got so low, he collected empty bottles and turned them in. He went so far as to take his mother's pension just to scrape together enough to buy a bottle of cheap alcohol. Laura was horrified. It was happening again. She could no longer control her son. She was even afraid of him. After all, he in a drunken rage was aggressive and violent, blamed her for everything and swore at every turn. Only now the woman realized what a fatal mistake she had made, helping to destroy the family of her son. After all, only next to Isabella Justin lived as a man. He could raise his son now, and would not drink at all. Laura bit her elbows. She would give anything to get it all back. But she realized it was too late. A year later, Isabella gave birth to a boy. Arnold, of course, delivered the baby himself. He was the first to take the baby in his arms, patted his bottom. He cried out, and the doctor laughed. "Well, hello, my good son. How strong you are. Daddy will love you and won't let anyone hurt you." Isabella spent all her time with her son and husband. She was a skillful homemaker. She was like a squirrel in a wheel. She had time for everything. And it was all in good fun. All the more so because Arnold's parents accepted her very warmly, like a daughter. They didn't mind Arnold adopting a boy. His mother often had heart-to-heart talks with her daughter-in-law. "Thank you, Isabella, for bringing Arnold back to life." After the death of his first wife and child, he seemed to be dead in spirit. My heart was breaking, watching my son walk around with that urn. He was dying of boredom and loneliness. Only work saved him. Now he's back to life, making plans again. He's always bragging about how smart he's got. He loves George like his own. I think he gives the baby all the love and tenderness that he didn't have time to give to his first son. "So I wish you nothing but happiness," the woman said with emotion. Isabella was very pleased with the warm words of her mother-in-law. She answered quite sincerely, "You are like a mother to me too, really. I feel loved, and I appreciate it. Unfortunately, I did not know motherly love and affection in my childhood. I lived in an orphanage, and I always dreamed that someday I would have a strong family, children, and a mom. And now all this has come true. I am immensely grateful to Arnold. He literally pulled me out of the abyss of betrayal and problems. He didn't let me break, protected me. He proved that not all men are the same, that he can be trusted. And I believe him, and I appreciate him, and I love him. You know, it's so amazing to me. Arnold and I are equally good together, even just to be quiet. We feel each other. So thank you for raising a real man." After a while, word spread around town about Dr. Arnold. Women recommended him to their friends and acquaintances, and those, in turn, to their own. And soon the head of the famous private clinic, Monty, came to Arnold's house. He offered the man a job. "Arnold, I have a very pleasant and favorable offer for you. Come work for me. You're an excellent specialist. I've made inquiries. You have a lot of experience in performing complex surgeries and deliveries. We really need people like you in the clinic. We'll discuss salary, no offense. We have the most precise modern equipment, all the conditions." "I think you won't regret it," said Monty. The doctor was very happy. After paying all the duties and taxes, there wasn't much money left for the family, and Arnold couldn't take bribes. His conscience didn't allow it. He considered it beneath his dignity. So he replied firmly, "Thank you for your kind words. Don't jinx it. There's nothing to think about. I'm in. I miss working full-time. I'd like to get back into the familiar atmosphere of the maternity ward. So I'd love to take you up on your offer." That's how Arnold came to work at the clinic. He got along well with the staff. His career was skyrocketing. His eyes were burning. He was back in the field. It was vital to him. There was a celebration in the family. My son was 1 year old. The whole family decided to celebrate. They set a table in a gazebo in the yard, invited parents, close friends and colleagues with their families. It was fun, noisy. Children ran squealing around the yard, entertained the little birthday boy, and he looked with interest at the toys given by the guests. Men were grilling kebabs, women were sharing their recipes. Isabella tried to be a hospitable hostess, looked after the guests. And then a dog barked. There was a soft knock on their wicket. Isabella ran to open it. She thought maybe another guest had come. But when she saw old Laura on the doorstep, she frowned and did not receive her kindly. "What do you want here? How did you even know where I live? Go away at once." The woman hesitated for a moment, then decided and held out a small package. "Hello, Isabella. Don't push me. I'll go now. I just wanted to take one look at my grandson. But if you don't mind, at least take a present from me. Please. Please forgive me. I know I've caused you a lot of grief, and I've paid for it all later. Justin's in a bad way. He's a drunk, and a lot of people are turning him down. We're so poor, but don't worry, I didn't come to complain. I just realized I had to repent, and I want to see my grandson." Isabella didn't want to hear anything. It was as if she'd burst into tears. "I don't care what happened to Justin or to you. You cut me out of your life. You left me pregnant in the hospital, and now you're here to repent. If it wasn't for Arnold, I don't know where I'd be right now. Would your grandson even have been born? Go away and take your gift, and forget you ever came here." Isabella slammed the gate angrily. All her memories, all her experiences came rushing back to her. She ran away into the garden to calm down and cry a little. Arnold noticed something wrong and followed his wife, hugged her with his big, strong arms. He listened to her without interrupting her and began to calm her down. "Well, don't cry. She has already left and will not bother us anymore. You know, I even feel sorry for her. Look how she's down. Her only son dying from alcohol. That's the worst punishment you can think of. So don't be mad at her. Let it go. We're having a party tonight. The guests are waiting. Come to the table." Isabella cuddled up to her husband and whispered, "It's so good to have you. You make me the happiest I've ever been. Always know that." The feast was a success. Life went on as usual. Isabella had already forgotten about that unpleasant meeting with her former mother-in-law. One day, the young people decided to go to the theater. The mother-in-law stayed with George. She loved to babysit her grandson. The couple had a great time. They walked leisurely through the park. Night, romance, lanterns burning, summer coolness. Isabella vividly discussed the play and the characters. Arnold was pleased that the two of them had gotten out together like this. He listened to the chirping of his wife, her ringing laughter, and it felt so good. Suddenly a groan was heard from the bushes nearby. Then an inarticulate mooing. Arnold, as a doctor, could not stay away. Immediately rushed there and took out in his arms some man. He was badly beaten. There wasn't a living thing. He reeked of alcohol. Isabella shrugged. It was so disgusting. And then she looked up and gasped. "Arnold, that's Justin. My God, what an animal he'd become. Who did that to him? What do I do? Should I call the police? Call an ambulance? Or maybe that's what he should do." But Arnold had already made up his mind. "No, Isabella, I can't do this. We have to save him. You and I are medical men first and foremost, and we have to do it. We took the Hippocratic Oath. We don't need to call an ambulance or the police. You know they won't take a patient like that. Help me carry him. We'll use our car to take him to my clinic and put him in the toxicology ward. They'll treat him there. They'll get him out of the hangover properly. And then we'll see what we can do with him. I'm amazed, of course, how a man can sink." Isabella nodded. She obeyed her husband in everything, though she wasn't thrilled with his idea of rescuing the traitor. The resentment still lingered in her heart, but she also realized that her husband was right. If they walked by and left Justin like that, she wouldn't forgive herself. Justin came to and couldn't quite place himself. White walls, silence. But then a pretty nurse walked in, and he realized he was in a hospital. She saw that the patient woke up and began to explain everything to him. "You're finally awake. Consider it your second birthday recently, and thank our Dr. Arnold Malashev. It was he who found you in the park at night in such a state and saved you, and he's paying for your treatment in full. A golden man. Why do you drink so much, dear? You have a whole bunch of diseases because of it. Okay, I'll bring you some lunch. Today we have mashed potatoes and cutlets. Are you hungry?" Justin was terribly embarrassed. He couldn't remember anything at all. His last memory was drinking his 5th bottle in a row with his buddies. Then he got sick, his eyes went black, and that's it, blackouts. So Isabella's current husband saved him. But why? He mumbled indistinctly. "Thank the doctor. Can I go home now? I have to go home. I have an old mother there." The nurse just shook her head. "No, my dear, you can't. You're going to be here a long time, I guess. Hang in there, till we get all the toxins out of you. And don't use your mother's name. She was here and she told me that her son was the only one drinking heavily. I wish you'd take pity on her, so just lay low and wait for lunch. This is a closed ward. You can't escape. If you get violent, they'll lock you up. Don't I understand why you want to go home? You want a drink?" Yeah, the man was shaking. He felt bad. He wanted to run away and have a drink. But on the other hand, now that he was sober, Justin looked at himself from the outside. He went to the mirror and was horrified. He looked like a swollen, beaten, unwashed bum. Justin did not understand how and when he could sink to such a deplorable state, what he had brought himself to. He thought of his mother and hated himself even more. Images surfaced of him hurting her, yelling at her, sneaking appliances out of the house. Panic and shame gripped the man. The door to the room opened, and Arnold walked in. Justin flinched and mumbled, "Hello, Arnold. Thank you for saving my life. Even though I'm a worthless little man, I trampled on my own life and lost everything. I've got no family, no job for a long time. Nothing, in fact, except the damn bottle. Help me out of this vicious circle. I won't be able to do it myself." The doctor shook his head and said sternly, "It's up to you. If you don't make any effort yourself, you'll be lying drunk in the yards and streets. No one will help you. But if you really decided to take care of yourself, it's a different matter. Then grit your teeth and bear it. You've got a long treatment ahead of you. If I see you come to your senses, I'll get you a job as an orderly. It's hard work. You have to show mercy, patience with patience, and it doesn't pay very much. But you have to start somewhere. And Isabella, my wife, we have a son growing up, and I will destroy anyone who, God forbid, offends my loved ones. So don't you dare look in her direction. She still hasn't forgiven you. I hope you heard me, and I won't regret saving you." The boy lowered his head, answering quietly, "You won't regret it. I promise. This is my only chance to be human again. I'm very sorry to Isabella. I've caused her a lot of pain. I'll tell you, I've regretted it a lot. But I realize there's no going back. I'll never bother you again. But I do ask one thing. Please let me apologize to her. I need it." Arnold answered evasively, "Not yet, we'll see. Maybe later. I have to go, and you heal. You're not old yet. You can start a new life if you want to." Soon Justin's mom came to visit. How ashamed was he to look her in the eye now. He fell to his knees, kissed her hands, and cried like a baby. "Mommy, I'm sorry, you fool. Only now, when sobered up, I realized what an animal and beast I was all this time. How much did you have to endure? Only a loving mother's heart can bear it all. I swear to you I will overcome this disease and become a human being. Do you believe me? It's so important that you do." Laura cried too, but finally her son came to his senses. She whispered, "Well, of course I believe you. I love you, son. Get up, I brought you some food. Sit down and eat. And I baked apple pie, your favorite. I'm so glad you're back to your old self. Everything's going to be okay." Justin won. He was able to hold on. After treatment and discharge, Arnold helped him get a job as an orderly. It was very hard for the man at first. His back ached and his arms hurt. But by helping the sick, it was as if he himself was cleansed from the inside. He saw how people were suffering, how they were trying to beg health from fate, and the slightest chance to get back on their feet. Justin began to appreciate every minute of his life, and he never looked at alcohol again. A year later, he found happiness. He met Hillary, the barmaid. This giggly girl literally infected him with positivity. She was so easy, so good. Justin didn't lie to her. Honestly told her about everything. How he was a scoundrel. How he had offended his ex-wife. Hillary took it philosophically. They said that what was, you can't get back. The main thing that now the man has changed. All this time, Arnold periodically communicated with Justin. You could say that they even became friends. Except Isabella didn't know anything about it. At the slightest mention of her ex-husband or mother-in-law, tears came to her eyes and spoiled her mood. She found it hard to breathe and panic set in. But Arnold, as an experienced doctor, understood. This is the body's reaction to the stress experienced. The woman is trying to push the past out of her memory, to push disturbing memories into a distant corner. But that was fundamentally wrong. He understood she needed to say everything, to spill out all the pain and forgive. Only then would her soul be completely at peace. Justin was tormented too. He was tormented by his conscience, burning with a hot iron from the inside. He had asked Arnold more than once for permission to see Isabella, but he had refused every time. Now he did. Let's do it this way. You and Hillary come to our house on Saturday. Isabella won't make a scene in front of strangers. I'll give you two a chance to talk alone. It's something you both really need. And then we'll see how things play out. Personally, I can see you've really changed, become a different person. But will Isabella understand that? Will she forgive you? I don't know, but it's worth a try. Justin was very happy. He told Hillary everything. She supported him and promised to help. Isabella, on the other hand, had no idea yet. Arnold told her that his acquaintances were coming, a couple of newlyweds. The table was set. The hostess had done her best, and here came the guests. First, a pretty, full-bodied woman entered the house. She said hello, handed little George a toy tank. Isabella found her very pleasant. The woman sat her down at the table and kept asking her questions. Where's your husband, Hillary? Why doesn't he come into the house? The woman hesitated, and Arnold took her under the arm and said, Honey, Hillary's husband is waiting for you outside. He has something very important to tell you. Come out to him for a minute, please. Isabella didn't understand, but she went out. She thought, what secrets, what kindergarten? But when she saw Justin, she immediately turned pale as chalk and felt sick again, short of breath. Her heart jumped out of her chest. She almost screamed. Why are you here? Go away, get out. I don't want to see you. But the man stayed where he was and began to speak. I beg you to listen to me, Isabella. Just 1 minute and I'll leave if you want me to. I have realized and understood many things since our divorce, and I still feel like a scoundrel and a scoundrel. I don't want anything from you. I won't hurt you anymore. I just came to repent. I want you to know that you are the best, the brightest thing in my life. I ruined it with my own hands, and I paid for it. Almost died of drunkenness. I lost everything. I came to thank you and your husband Arnold. He's a real man like very few men. Thank you for picking me up in the park and saving me, even though I deserve to just walk on by. I won't hurt you again. I realize I lost my son too, that he thinks Arnold's his daddy. But you can stop hating. Let go. Isabella was angry. Forgive. Do you know how I cried in the hospital? I almost lost my baby. I thought I was going to lose my mind. I know you threw me out of your life. And she slapped her husband. How long had she dreamed of doing that? The man didn't fight back, didn't shut down, stood meekly and silently. Surprisingly, the panic and fear began to let go of Isabella. She inhaled and exhaled calmly, as if she had finally let go of her resentment. At the screams, Hillary ran out and began to wail. You'll forgive us, Isabella. It was a foolish idea to come to you. We'll go, I suppose. You will forgive him if you can. Isabella was suddenly embarrassed by her behavior. It wasn't exactly people's fault anymore, and Arnold had arranged all this for her. The woman replied, I guess we should all just calm down. Nobody's going anywhere. And there's so much to do. Let's go to the table. Arnold exhaled. Justin's stiffness and tension slowly disappeared, too. It was fun. Hillary told funny stories about the patients, and her husband tried his best to lighten the mood. Little by little, Isabella relaxed. To her surprise, she began to notice that Justin had really changed. He didn't even touch alcohol, he was serious. He talked a lot about the meaning of life, about his mother. Isabella involuntarily listened to herself and realized that she no longer felt anything for Justin at all. But looking at Arnold, she was overwhelmed with love and tenderness. He was her nearest and dearest. Justin found it hardest to look at George. The baby was reaching for his father. He kissed him, tickled him. It was obvious that he loved him sincerely. Justin thought, what a fool I am. I could have raised my son the same way. And now he won't even know I'm his daddy. When he and Hillary got home, the man suddenly said, "Hillary, honey, give me a baby. I'll be a good daddy. I promise I'll never touch a bottle again. I've made so many mistakes in my life. And now I want to build a real family with you. You're the only one who understands me like no one else." The woman snuggled up to her husband. She really loved Justin sincerely and wanted to live with him all her life together. And she herself had wanted a child for a long time. But because of her fullness, the relationship didn't work out. And Justin was the first who saw her soul whole, who loved her. Slowly, the young people became family friends. They celebrated important dates together and socialized closely. Isabella let go of her resentment and even allowed Laura to see her grandson. Her soul had mellowed, all thanks to her wise husband Arnold. Michelle was finally free. The prison gates closed behind her. Jessie was free, young, and could feel happy. Jessie stood at a loss and didn't know where to go now. No one had met her. She had no relatives as she had grown up in an orphanage. Her parents may have been alive. But what could Jessie, taken from this family at the age of 3, know about them? She never remembered them. Only occasionally, only in nightmares, did she see that red room in the corner of which she lived like an animal, eating disgusting food after the drunken binges of those who were her mother and father. But whether they were her real parents, she had always doubted. And not just because those men had never been interested in her, but because she remembered how her mother used to say to the social workers with relief, "Take the girl. I'll finally get rid of this brat. They haven't paid money for her for a long time anyway. They abandoned her and forgot about her. Who abandoned her? Why forgotten, and who was supposed to pay the money?" This she did not know and suspected she never would. But then she lived in an orphanage where it wasn't easy either. Better than that first home, of course. At least they fed. There were clean beds without bed bugs and cockroaches, and there was a chance to go outside. But it wasn't the best orphanage, not like the ones on TV. I guess it was ordinary, though. TV shows you what you need. It wasn't hungry, but it wasn't nourishing either. It just wasn't good. Boring. Jessie didn't even make any friends at the orphanage. What kind of friends? She wasn't interested in socializing because she was unsociable and couldn't get along with the other kids. She wasn't liked by the kids or the teachers. There's a princess walking around. Everything is wrong with her. Taken from an ordinary drunken family. If she had lived with them, they would have drunk her long ago. But here they feed her, clothe her, and instead of saying thank you, she wrinkles her nose, they said. Jessie knew very well she wasn't from the palace. She remembered her relatives, though vaguely, but she did not think she was in paradise. She didn't feel grateful to the state for taking care of her. But since some time she learned that behind the walls of the orphanage there is a big world, where a completely different, happy life, but from the orphanage to the big world was not let out. A few times they took me to the Christmas tree, to some performances. But what can you see through the bus window? The first time Jessie ran away was when she was 7. But where does a little girl like that, who didn't know which way to go? She was caught and returned. But she breathed the air of freedom and loved it forever. And now, almost 20 years later, she was in the same happy, overwhelming state of freedom, and would never ever again be in an institution where she was forced to get up and lie down on command, where she had to eat by the hour what she was given, where at any moment she could expect a shout, a push, or a blow. It was exactly the same feeling she had had then, almost 20 years ago, when she had felt free, and just as she had then, she had gone wherever her eyes took her. just because she wanted to and because she could. And now she can't be caught, and she won't be caught. She's out legally, and no one else has to, or will show her their unwanted concern for her. But where to go and how to use that freedom, she had no idea. Jessie ran away from the orphanage regularly, even though she knew that eventually she would be caught. But at least for a short time, she could be away from these damned walls. For these few hours. And then days she was ready to pay for weeks in the isolation center. Deprivation of some orphanage benefits, however, very dubious. To endure the scolding, reproaches, and forecasts of educators. You want to be free again? You'll make it to adulthood. You won't live to see adulthood. You'll end up in prison. Is that what you want? You want escape from there. They will teach you to love freedom. It was a shame to hear such a thing. Why would she go to prison? She wasn't going to do anything wrong. On the contrary, she was sure that her adult life would be honest and beautiful. What kind of life she was going to have was suggested by being free. Growing up in a state institution, she always wanted something tasty. Not the orphanage sticky porridge, not liquid soup, but fried potatoes with onion rings, not gray cutlets, but something unusual and delicious. And such things were only at Liberty. But it cost money, which of course Jessie didn't have and couldn't have. So she could only inhale incredibly seductive aromas of unknown dishes, which sometimes came from some doors, above which was written cafe or restaurant. At first, the girl did not even come close to such establishments. She was afraid not to go inside. She quickly passed by, inhaling the aromas of dishes, the composition, taste, and even appearance of which she could not imagine. She didn't dare to enter any of these establishments either. She knew they wouldn't let her in. When she was a little girl, she had tried, but they wouldn't let her in. Go away, girl. No kids allowed in here. And she wasn't cheeky, and she didn't know how to ask. So she stood around sometimes, breathing in the aromas. One day, she had an amazing stroke of luck. She was hanging around a summer cafe where tables were set up outside. People were eating their wonderful meals, chatting, laughing. Suddenly, some aunt, apparently tipsy and therefore kind. Her little girl, you must be hungry. And she handed her a chebrek wrapped in oil paper. It's a miracle. Not a pie, but something hot inside in the thin, crispy dough. Wonderfully flavorful juice and meatball that tasted vintage. And a big one it was. It disappeared in my hungry stomach in seconds. You could eat 1,000,000 of them. And if someone gave them to me. But that was the only one, and it was over quickly. But the hands on which the drops of juice and fat fell smelled of this deliciousness for a long time. Well, she was chased away from those summer cafes too, and there were no more kind people. It was better near simple summer cafes, where people did not sit, but ate standing up. They drank, of course, and were kind. They took pity on the little girl, looking at her hungry eyes, and shared various tasty things, and they caught more people there. The cops would hang around, catch her, and send her back to the orphanage. There again, they took her away, deprived her, scolded her, sent her to other orphanages, and threatened to send her to a colony as soon as possible. An infestation rare, wandering around in the middle of nowhere. Something will happen to her, will be responsible, and it will happen to her. She hangs around the pubs. But where's that been seen? She'll ask the drunken men. Oh, she'll ask for it. And the main thing is that she teaches other girls bad things. After all, tells them about all sorts of shebereks and kebabs, and they do not give them for free. Pay with what? But with the same and a couple more years, and the case is ready. She herself will go by the hand and will pave the way for others. I'm sorry. She should be put behind a high fence and kept there until she comes of age. And how will she grow up? Let her be responsible for herself. Such talk frightened her, and even more touched her remark of one of the educators, who, learning about the true adventures, strictly and seriously said, the main thing, Jessie, self-esteem. It doesn't matter who you are, who your parents are, how you live now. It's important to respect yourself and remember that you're a girl. And know that if you beg at some diner, you'll be a beggar forever. You're still young, but your future is already being set. You can't eat scraps and humiliate yourself. If you want to be a respectable person, start being one now. Jessie wasn't going to beg, though. Just looking, apparently, at people and their food. So they didn't share anything. It happened that even from the tables of street cafes, she slowly picked up something uneaten. But since Rozesa Semyonovna said it was wrong, she wouldn't do it. She doesn't want to be a maid all her life. She'll work by herself in a nice restaurant, the one on one of the main streets of the city. Yes, Jessie chose this place as her future job when she was 10 years old and thought she would make it. In the meantime, she could only sit in the distance and watch beautiful, dressed-up people approach the restaurants and watch them walk out of there. Through the large windows, she could see them sitting at tables or celebrating in large groups, or sitting in pairs or alone. Jessie imagined herself sitting inside like that. It was nice, but she wanted to work there too. At first, she thought she was ready for even the most insignificant position, washing tables and dishes. Then she remembered her teacher's words about dreaming bigger, and she decided that she would own a restaurant. She had no idea how to achieve it, but she could dream, right? No, as she got older, she realized, dreaming is fine, of course, but you have to look at the world more realistically. No one would hire her as a waitress without special education. First, it is necessary to finish school at least somehow, to graduate from the orphanage, and then we will see. But everything went wrong. Jessie finished high school with difficulty. She showed no interest in learning, and the urge to run away from the orphanage didn't go away either. She couldn't stay still. However, she gave up this idea, realizing that it is fraught. After school, she went where they directed, in the sewing school, which wanted the least. But she realized that she had to obey her elders, otherwise she could get nowhere, and she was supposed to be given a place to live. They didn't deceive her. But not a new apartment, but already some kind of settled, small, dark, not the best, but her own. That's good. She could live and think about another job because she didn't want to sew at all, but she had to. And not in a factory or a workshop, but in a colony. She got there through no fault of her own. She was just hanging out with a random group of people. But then it turned out there'd been a theft, but she was nearby. There didn't seem to be much evidence against her. But the girl was from an orphanage with a bad record, to put it mildly. They gave her 2 years for nothing, and her teachers and nannies were right, who taught her to love freedom. A colony is not an orphanage. But she was 18 now, not 8. Jessie realized that childhood was over. No one would discount the fact that she was orphaned and small. Those damn 2 years had been hard, but at least she could sew, which helped. There was nowhere to go back to. She was all alone. No one would send her a parcel, letters of support like other prisoners. So it wasn't easy. But she got through it. She's out and about. She doesn't know where she's going. But what does it matter if she can go wherever she wants, and no one asks her where and why? But no one can tell her what to do next. It's a good thing they kept the apartment. Thanks to the lawyer, he told her how to write a statement. He was useless. But it is necessary to live not only somewhere but also on something. Jessie did not even remember about her childhood dream. In what restaurant or even in the most rundown beer hall will not hire a person with a criminal record? And they didn't want to take her to sewing shops either. But at first she didn't worry. The euphoria of free life did not let her put her hands down. And then one day, by chance, she got the luck she never dreamed of. Jessie was walking through the park, and a young mother with a stroller was walking towards her. Jessie saw it and envied it. How lucky people are. She loved children, strangely enough. She herself did not know why, and why she had such an attitude to babies because she had none of her own. And in the orphanage, groups of small children were in another building, so it was rarely possible to socialize with them. But she could not pass by babies in strollers. Sure to look in, and at the sight of this baby becomes warmer on the soul, and here are 3 at once. And the mother, a young, beautiful, well-groomed woman, does not look happy at all, more like annoyed, and handles the stroller somehow ineptly. The wheel is stuck in some pothole. Instead of steering it carefully, the young mother jerked it. The kids woke up, freaked out, cried, and instead of pitying and calming them down, she angrily barked, "Will you shut up or not?" "Let me help you." Jessie came running over, helped free the stroller, and leaned over to the babies. "Well, who's crying here? It's all good now. You'll go on walking now." "Oh, not children, but a punishment," complained the mother. They yell and yell one by one, then in unison. There's no storage. "Why? They're so nice, all boys." "Oh, you're lucky to have 3 at once. You don't often get such luck." "Oh, my enemies would be so lucky," said the woman angrily. "And you, I see, know how to handle children. And such a young woman, do you have a pedagogical education?" She noticed that as soon as Jessie spoke to them, the kids calmed down, started smiling and reaching out to her with their hands. Jessie replied, "No, no education. I just love children. I would love to take care of them. I look at them and my heart is happy. Do you work anywhere? Asked the stranger. No, not working yet, just entertaining the children, replied Jessie. Do you know if you'd like to take me in as your nanny? Unexpectedly, the young mother suggested. My husband and I will pay well, and you can live with us. A college education doesn't matter to me, to be honest. I can see you have a talent for dealing with children. No one can calm them down that quickly. I thought it was going to be another hour-long concert, and you figured out how to calm them down in a minute? Jessie liked the suggestion, but she was in a bit of shock, realizing that after the young mother learned the truth about her, she would run away with the babies, and would also berate her for meddling with her children. And she, no matter how offended she was to refuse such an offer, had to say, "But you see, I was recently released from prison, where I spent 2 years. Where am I going to get you to see me like this?" Jessie's eyes even brimmed with tears. Either her mother felt sorry for her, or she wanted to take care of her children. But she said, "Oh, I don't care about your imprisonment. It's not for murder. Everything else is nothing. The main thing is that the children are looked after. Otherwise, I'll go crazy until they're at least a little older." Really, I'm all taken up in 6 months. My husband didn't want a nanny at first. The kids were too young. The nurse helped, but now I can't find one. You know, there aren't many people willing to do it for 3. Well, do you agree? Apparently, she had already decided everything for herself. She switched to you and completely handed over control of the stroller to Jessie. Let's go straight to our place. I'll show you the house and we'll get started right away. And in the evening my husband will come. You'll get to know each other. Jessie gladly agreed. Only your husband probably won't approve. He might be a more sensible man and realize that it's not a good idea to invite the first man he meets to look after his children. And when he finds out everything about me, he'll kick me out. The family appeared to be very wealthy. The landlady's name was Emily. She lived with the children and her husband in a huge house where the children had a large room, but only one for the 3 of them. Well, we don't have to run to each one in a separate one, Emily chattered as she showed Jessie the house. I hope you'll stay on my team until school. I'm exhausted. But I never thought I'd have so many children and in such a brutal way. It's Jake, my husband. I didn't really want kids, but he's the one who wants them. And what does he do for you? Jessie asked, realizing that such a rich house couldn't belong to a simple man. He has his own restaurant downtown called Aristocrat's Picnic. Have you heard of it? Yes, I've seen it, of course. But I haven't been inside, Jessie replied, confused. It was, after all, the very establishment she'd dreamed of working at, the one she'd spent so much time near as a child. It was called something else back then. But you'll work for us. Maybe you can talk to Jake when he comes in. We'll agree on a salary. He's a man who's not pushy. Yeah, I think he'll kick me out, Jessie shared her concerns. I'll kick him out. He'll be out himself. My word is the most important thing in this house, so don't be afraid. Soon the owner arrived. He looked tired, but he wanted to see the children. How was your day? He asked his wife. Jake, fine. And it's all thanks to her, Jessie. You don't know how she handles them. When she looks at them, they're all smiles on their faces, happy, contented, happy, and they didn't cry once. They ate without any whimsy, and she put them to sleep quietly, too. Very pleased, the young, handsome owner looked at Jessie affably and said she could just call him by his first name. I mean, she's practically family. Jessie was really getting very tired. Still, 3 kids. She showed Michael the paperwork, told him all about herself. Michael was silent, didn't say anything. But then Jessie heard Amelia saying indignantly to him, "Yes, please, throw her out only, and the children then, either yourself or give them somewhere. There are some nurseries. Or did you think I'd let you? You always mock me." When the landlady came out after this conversation, Jessie was ready to pack her things so as not to serve as a cause of discord. But Amelia shouted at her, "It's all right, you stay. I told you, you can't argue with me." And so Jessie became Travis and Logan's nanny, and soon an actual member of the family. Not an equal member, but still a member of the family. Jessie liked the kids at first sight, and she grew more attached to them every day. Her biggest fear now was losing this place. It wasn't that she was afraid of losing her paycheck, which was quite substantial, by the way. She was afraid to imagine being separated from her children. It turned out that the owners were afraid of the same thing. But you're still a very young girl, Jessie. You'll want a marriage, children of your own. I can't even imagine what will happen to our boys without you, the landlord once said. Oh, knock on wood, Emilia immediately jumped in. She's only 20 years old. We've got 10 years, if not more, to spare. Let her stay with us for now, and then let her marry wherever she wants to go. I don't think about that yet, Jesse smiled. And I can't imagine loving anyone more than your boys. Yeah, and not without you, Emilia agreed. You went shopping the other day. There was such a shouting match. I almost went deaf. You don't linger anywhere. You taught yourself to do it, and now you're doing it yourself. It's good that she and Jesse have such a rapport. But still, Emilia, you should pay more attention to your children. You're their mom, Michael reminded her. I don't forget that, but I haven't seen the light of day in 6 months. I have my whole life to live, Emilia replied. And she indeed, having realized that she could shift most of the maternal duties to the nanny, began to live, that is, to lead the very life of a wealthy lady, which apparently led before the birth of the children. Emilia woke up late when her husband had already gone to work and the children were raised, fed and dressed. Then she would spend a long time getting ready, tidying herself up in the bathroom, then in her room in front of the dressing table, making herself beautiful. And only then would she look in on the babies, saying indifferently, cheerfully, "Hello, offspring," and to Jesse, "I'm going to run errands. I need to go shopping or to the salon. It's time to get cleaned up." Carelessly tossing, "Kids, behave yourselves, obey Amber," she'd leave, sometimes for the whole day. Once in a while, she stayed home and kept Jesse company to walk down the street with her and the kids. But she paid no particular attention to them, nor did they to her. Indeed, there was no connection between this mother and the children. That surprised Jesse, who sincerely loved the kids and did not understand how she could be so indifferent to them. But at the same time, she herself was quite satisfied with this state of affairs. She loved the babies very much and was proud of their affection. She saw that the father loved his boys. No matter how tired he came home from work, he always found time to be with them, to play with them, to talk to them. But with his wife, it seems, his relationship did not add up, mainly because of the same thing, because of her inattention to the children, unwillingness to give time to them, and household chores. In addition to the nanny, they had a housekeeper who did the cleaning, sometimes cooked something, went to the store for groceries. But even with so many attendants, Emilia did not miss the opportunity to roll her husband a scandal on the theme that he dumped everything on her 3 children. And in general, you all. And I, by the way, I was not born to do everything here as a housekeeper. Don't you realize that it's very difficult? I'm already exhausted. I understand perfectly well, Michael replied. What I don't realize is that it's harder for you than it is for me. You're never even home. I don't know where you hang out all day. Oh, is that so? I hang around. You'll soon accuse me of having lovers. Jesse never accused you of that, but you wouldn't be surprised to hear that something like that might be going on. But what kind of mother with 3 kids spends her whole days out of the house? After that, particularly bitter arguments and quarrels broke out. At first, Jesse felt sorry for the landlord who had such a bad relationship with his wife. Then she began to feel sympathy for him and noticed that he also clearly cared for her. At first, she took it as gratitude for being so good to his children, but then she realized that Michael cared for her as a woman. It didn't make her happy, it frightened her. Jesse was well aware of who she was in this house, even taking into account that her husband's relationship with his wife left a lot to be desired. What business was it of hers? Michael had married Emily, which meant he had loved her at least once. And if things aren't going well between them now, they could change at any moment. And the fact that she liked Michael herself was irrelevant, just as she had no right to meddle in anyone's personal life. She began to try to communicate less with the father of her charges, but it was unrealistic. Michael constantly asked how the kids behaved, what changes had occurred in their behavior, what they did during the day, how they felt. And at the same time he was talking to her, "Aren't you bored with them all day long? Surely you want to take a break from this kind of work sometimes." "I don't get tired," Jesse answered. She tried to keep her voice as neutral as possible. "I enjoy being with them, and I'm perfectly able to rest when they're asleep. Oh, and Emilia spends time with them during the day too." And that was already a blatant lie. But Jesse felt it was her duty to remind him that Michael had a wife and the children had a mother, and she was just a hired nanny, something she never forgot. He realized that the nanny was telling the truth, But he didn't argue, instead trying to communicate with her more often. "You know I own my own restaurant, Jesse. And I thought you said you'd seen it, but you never went in. Wouldn't you like to visit it?" "Maybe I have," she answered. "I used to some time ago, but not so much now. I'm busy with the children after. I'm much more interested with them than in some restaurant." In this case, she spoke quite sincerely, dreaming about the restaurant, about working in it, and about the possibility of tasting something extraordinary, delicious, had long ago been relegated to the background. She was not going to admit that visiting this establishment had been her childhood dream. She was embarrassed about it, and she was even more embarrassed about Michael's attitude toward her, because she felt that he cared for her and might be interested in getting closer to her. Even the very possibility of such a thing seemed to her as horrible as vulgarity. A nanny having an affair with the master, and if the mistress found out, not only would she lose her place, but she'd never see the children again. No, there's no way that could happen, she thought. Now Jessie dreamed of her home, of her children, and her family, although she realized that it was a pipe dream and not at all because she didn't have the opportunity to marry. Perhaps if she had gone somewhere, she would have gotten some fiancé, but she didn't want to go anywhere. And certainly not to meet anyone, because she could no longer hide from herself that she loved one man, Michael, and the children. She loved these 3 children, who were born not to Amelia but to someone else, and even though they are other children, apparently they do not need them at all. But anyway, Amelia was Michael's mother and wife, and Jessie was just a babysitter. And sometimes she cried bitterly at night, realizing the hopelessness of her situation. Perhaps the right thing to do would be to leave this house now, to go away and forget Michael and her foolish feeling forever. But still, that meant leaving the children. There was no way Jessie was willing to do that. She loved them and she couldn't part with them. Most importantly, she couldn't leave the babies because she knew there was no mother for them. Jessie was clearly puzzled by Amelia's attitude toward the children. She wondered how the new nanny would treat the babies. It was unlikely that anyone could love them the way she did. With these thoughts, Jessie hugged the children and then scolded herself. Of course, Amelia loved them, just in her own way, not knowing how to express her feelings. But she was their mother, so she would learn. Michael was becoming more and more sympathetic to Jessie, and she was finding it harder and harder to resist, because she had feelings for him too. But how to fight those feelings? Jessie didn't know, and then she realized she didn't want to fight them either. After all, why couldn't one love a person? One could keep one's feelings secret. However, hiding them from Michael proved difficult. He fell in love with Jessie and saw that she was not indifferent to him. Soon his courtship became more frank. One day Michael bluntly said, "Jessie, you see how I feel about you, and I see how you feel about me. We love each other. Why are you pushing me away?" "Don't you understand?" Jessie exclaimed. "I work as a nanny in your house with your children, and you want me to be your mistress? Isn't it enough to have a woman you love? Or would you have a harem? You have a wife." It was evident that the conversation was agonizing for Michael as well. "Yes, but look at the relationship I have with my wife. She's had 3 kids, and Hey, Jessie, you don't know the main thing. She didn't give birth to them. We got these babies from an orphanage. Their mother's dead, no relatives, and I've always dreamed of having a big family." Amelia, on the other hand, didn't want kids, but she didn't want to get divorced. It's all about money, you know. So I decided to adopt orphans. She was against it, but she agreed to it to avoid divorce. And now she doesn't want a divorce, even though I'm ready to file for divorce tomorrow. But legally, she is their mother. "Please stop your harassment," Jessie tried to explain, but realized she couldn't hide her feelings. "I grew up in such an environment that anything could have happened to me. And it did. But since I was a little girl, I knew it was all about respecting myself. How will I respect myself if I become the mistress of the man I work for?" Herself is eager to convince herself. Eventually, they became lovers. Jessie realized the duality of her position, but she was happy. She had a lover. He loved her. They lived together. Yes, formally he was married to another, but Michael said that he would divorce Amelia, marry Jessie, and then she would officially become a mother of boys, which she dreamed of. But the happiness was short-lived. One day Amelia came home at the wrong time and realized her husband's relationship with Jessie. A huge scandal broke out. "You've got a snake on your chest." "Wait," he screamed, Amelia. She herself brought this scum into the house. She stole my children. She wants to steal my husband. Stop it. You know that's not true. Michael tried to calm his wife. How did you betray me? Killed me. Do you understand? Emilia rushed into the nursery where the children, hearing the screams, were crying loudly. She grabbed them in her arms and ran around the house screaming hysterically, telling the 1-year-olds how horribly their mother had been insulted. A terrified Jake, Logan, and Travis reached for Jessie. She, with trembling hands, was packing up her things. Her fairy tale was over as it should have been. She was shamefully banished, having lost everything. Emilia, stop it, please, Michael said. You're scaring the children. He was thrashing between the two women. Jessie, don't go because the children... That's right, the children shouldn't be living in a house with a woman like that. Get out of here right now, Emilia shouted. But you realize that's not possible right now, Michael tried to calm her down. Jessie, wait, don't leave. At least for the sake of the children, Michael begged. I'm not staying here for a minute. Yes, for the sake of the children. Emily's right. They shouldn't have to live in this environment. Come on, Jessie said tearfully. You see, even these creatures who've been in prison understand perfectly well that it can't be like this. What about you? Let her get out immediately. I do not want to see them in my house, shouted the hostess, trying to drown out the child's crying on the... As she said goodbye, Jessie glanced only at the children. She hurriedly picked up the things in her bag and went out. Michael was about to rush after her, but his wife stopped. Well, dear, she said in a calm voice, let's stop all this immediately. You forget your mistress and the whole story. We live as a normal couple, or else I'll leave home with the kids right now. It doesn't matter where, and you know where. But everyone will know you're having an affair with your own kid's nanny. That would be a big disadvantage to your reputation. Now, that was a serious consideration for Michael. He was about to sign a very important contract, and the news that he had an affair with a nanny, which caused his wife and 3 babies to run away from home, would jeopardize not only his reputation, but also the entire existence of the restaurant, which was his brainchild and breadwinner. Certainly the children were important to him, and Jessie herself was important to him. But if he lost the business, he would lose the children. After all, Emilia was officially their mother and had every right to take them and leave. Or not even leave, but sue him for everything. He'd be left with nothing, and most importantly, without the kids, who would certainly have a hard time with a mom like that. He couldn't risk everything, not even for Jessie, whom he truly loved. So he had to accept the separation, although he tried to call and explain she was no longer picking up the phone, and that was quite expected and very much in her spirit. The girl was too proud. Michael knew that and realized that he was very guilty in front of her, but there was nothing he could do about it at this point. Jessie, having left the house where her heart remained, almost fell right on the street. Michelle was horrified by what had happened. Everything was gone. She was separated from her children, separated from the man she loved. Now her life would never be the same. She was what she remained, a criminal, and she would be like that all her life, not noticing that there was cold rain outside, which streamed down her face and body. She walked without seeing the road, reached her empty, abandoned apartment, lay down on the bed and lay like that for a long time, not realizing what she should do next. That is, she didn't think about any future. She didn't have one. And the past was terrible. It wasn't until a few days later that Jessie almost didn't realize what she was doing. She decided to go outside. She had to buy some food because she hadn't eaten anything for a few days. She just didn't feel hungry. She actually had a high fever. Jessie reached some store and passed out. People called an ambulance and she was taken to the hospital. Actually, nothing really bad happened to her. A nervous shock, a bad cold. Yes, it could have ended very badly. Weakened body did not want to fight the disease. She could have died of pneumonia. Fortunately, the elderly Dr. George Matthews, who admitted her, treated her carefully, examined her, diagnosed her, and prescribed the right treatment. But perhaps it was not only as a complex, interesting case that she attracted George Matthews' attention. He had another interest as well. Examining Jessie, he noticed an unusual birthmark on her shoulder. The girl herself paid no attention to it, as she was used to it. But people around her often asked if it was a tattoo, and it was a birthmark that had been with her all her life. When Jessie felt better, the doctor came in and asked her about the mark, but she just waved it off. Yes, it had been there since birth. Do you know, dear young lady? George Matthews asked her, that you are Rich Harris to a good fortune. What are you saying? Uzesi asked indifferently. And what did my fine parents leave me? A collection of wine bottles. Why? Wondered the doctor. Because I remember them perfectly well. They were alcoholics, and they were deprived of parental rights when she was 3 years old. They put her in an orphanage, she said. The doctor's words suddenly interested her for a moment, breaking through the apathy that made her so indifferent to everything around her. But suddenly she remembered her childhood years and the cry of her so-called mother. Take that bastard away, told the doctor, as if to confirm her recollection. No, it wasn't quite like that. Your guardians were not alcoholics. The ones you think of as your father and mother were just guardians. Your mother's name was Mary Valentine. She was a very wealthy woman, but unfortunately she died at a young age because of a rival business. Her father, her husband Scott Williams, was left the heir. Realizing that the competitors, having killed his mother, would not leave the whole family alone, he wrote a will in favor of his daughter Jessie Williams. To secure the girl, he gave her to the family of drinking spouses, realizing that the little millionaire there no one will not look for. Meanwhile, he promised the guardians to give money for the child, and apparently for some time faithfully fulfilled his obligations, but after he died himself. But the will was still valid. So now you're the sole heir to a huge fortune. What are you going to do with all this? Jessie asked in surprise. I still don't believe it, she said. Prove your parentage and your right to inherit. I'll help you with that. And then you can live in peace and wealth and do whatever you want. You can get an education, start your own business. The possibilities are endless. I'm sorry, but what you're saying is a fairy tale, Jessie said. My birth certificate says my parents are Scott Williams and Mary Valentine. So what? First and last names aren't that uncommon. And since they're dead, I can't prove anything. I think it's all a bit of a chimera. It would be easier to leave it as it is and not dream of anything. Take your time. I'll help you with the paperwork and everything. You can always count on me. Why? Jessie asked, perplexed. Why do you care so much about all this? Do you hope to get your share? How much will I owe for this? Don't say that, honey. George Matthews replied. I don't want anything from you. Why, I'll be sure to tell you sometime later. Jessie was in the hospital for another week before she came to her senses. During that time, she and George Matthews talked about many things. He told her about his parents, showed her some pictures he had of his father and mother. She, on the other hand, told him all about her love, about what had caused her to fall into a severe depression, as well as about her childhood and dreams. Afterward, she saw how the doctor was sometimes horrified by her stories and wondered why he was so moved by them. After all, he is an outsider. Sure, her story is capable of evoking empathy, but not that much. George Matthews could literally hold back tears at times. But, as you can see, she said, it all turned out well. You know, I've been thinking a lot about what I'm going to do now. It seems like the best thing to do would be to fulfill my childhood dream. Open a restaurant of some kind. There should be enough money for that. Not a restaurant, of course, but a big restaurant, replied Jessie. No, big is too big. I don't have that kind of education, let alone experience. Thinking of Michael, of course. Would they both be restaurant owners and maybe even competitors? And would he, upon learning of her rise, be surprised, delighted? What to think about that now? He'd probably already forgotten her silly feelings. And if he had, wasn't it time to forget it all? But it had happened. Who hasn't had an unhappy love affair in their youth? Everybody, I suppose. And she should be no exception. Now she had to get on with rebuilding her life, especially since the opportunity seems to have presented itself. She's lived her whole life and never knew she had other parents. I always thought she was the daughter of some alcoholics. That's why her life didn't work out. There you go. The high point of her career was babysitting rich people. And if it wasn't for that, I'd have spent the rest of my life in prison. And in my brief hours of freedom, I'd be licking my lips at restaurants. But now new opportunities have opened up. Had they really opened up, Jessie decided she was going to start living the life she'd once wanted. Well, money opens many doors. But, of course, it wouldn't bring back the love she'd lost. Well, what can I do? I'll wait for the next one then. I thought she was going to call George Matthews. Jessie went to her late father's trustee, proved her parentage, and stepped in to claim her inheritance. Thus, Jessie became a wealthy woman and a very different person. Was it the money, or was she so influenced by it, or a broken heart? But she became pragmatic, completely devoid of sentimentality and romantic dreams. At least that's what she looked like outwardly. No one knew that sometimes, alone in her swanky new apartment, she suffered, crying nights, remembering the 3 little ones she considered her own and thinking about how much she wished she could at least look at them. But she wouldn't let herself, afraid that when she approached the house where the 3 lived, she wouldn't see her beloved. Yes, she continued to love Michael, but she was well aware that meeting him would do no good, even if she thought he would want to continue the relationship. She would never agree to that, even if he decided to divorce his wife. But can she forgive how easily he gave up on her once? Since she can't be together with him, then the children are lost forever. But that's okay, Jessie thought sometimes. Maybe I'll find love someday, and I'll have children of my own. But so far no one could touch her heart and all her strength, mental and physical. She directed to the development of her restaurant, small yet. But something more serious she didn't dare to do. But as Jessie chose her assistants quite competently, the business was going uphill, and soon the establishment gained popularity. And the meeting with Michael did happen. They were now in the same circle, so it was no surprise that he met his former lover. Michael was amazed at how much she had changed. "Did you get married?" he asked. "Do you think a woman can only find success by getting married?" Jessie replied coldly. If left alone, she would remain a girl, suitable only as a mistress to a rich man." "Pauline," said Michael, "you know very well how I felt about you and how I still feel about you." "Of course I do," she shrugged. "You used me when I was dependent on you, and then you kicked me out. It was no big deal." "But it wasn't," Michael exclaimed. "I remember everything." "How are the children?" Jessie asked what was bothering her the most. "Not bad. You know, they remember you." "I wonder what they remember," she grinned. "They were barely a year old when I left, and now they're about 3. What can they remember?" "Yes, they remember everything. They have a different nanny now, but they remember Nanny Jessie." "Very touching," Jessie said, hiding the fact that her heart squeezed at the news, even if it was false. And she wasn't going to ask Emily. But Michael said, "I'm separated from my wife. That is, she's been gone from me for about a year now. Not about me, not about the kids, of course. I'm sorry for your loss, but I hope they're successfully consoling you on the side." "No, they're just an old good woman. But I can't forget you, Jessie. I know you don't believe me and you can't forgive me, but don't think of me in a bad way. I don't remember you good or bad," she said, and wishing her good luck, she walked away. Yes, her heart was clenching. She wanted to go back and tell Michael that she still loved him, that she didn't forget him for a minute, that she was always pining for him, for the children, but she couldn't do that. Jessie remembered to be proud, to respect herself, and now she had all the reasons to do so and the possibilities. There was only one, to be happy with those she loved truly. It was terribly painful. No amount of money, no amount of success professionally could comfort her. With Michael, they continued to cross paths solely on business. Every time she met his gaze, she knew he wanted her back. And she wanted her back. And in the end, she couldn't take it anymore. Between them, there was an explanation, as a result of which both came to the main, probably, the decision in their lives. They love each other and want to be together, and nothing is getting in the way. Plus, Jessie got to meet the little ones and see how they've grown. Jessie realized that they really remembered her. More importantly, she realized she couldn't live without them anymore. "How much have I missed you?" she exclaimed. "They've grown so much, gotten so beautiful, and all that has passed me by. No, I don't want to be the owner of any restaurant. I want to be a nanny." "You can be their mom," Michael said. "Marry me, Jessie, and let's raise our children together." She agreed, and the wedding preparations began. Before applying to the registry office, Jessie still told Michael about how she was able to become the owner of the restaurant. Before that, she said she'd gotten an inheritance without going into details. Now she decided to reveal that it was the will of Scott Williams' father. "What did you say?" Michael exclaimed. "But that was my dad's name, wasn't it?" "So you have a completely different last name." "Yeah, it's my mom's last name, because they weren't married. But as far as I know, my dad was paying me child support before he died." They checked a few more facts of their father's biographies. Michael showed Jessie the pictures, and she realized that her life had crashed again. She was going to marry her half-brother. They had the same father. Who could Jessie run to with this trouble? Clearly, only to the man who had changed her life so much by literally pulling her out of the abyss of despair, George Matthews. Michelle, burying her face in her hands, folded on the table and choking back tears, told of her trouble, and at the end exclaimed, "Well, why did you show me a normal life? Maybe I should have died then." And suddenly, raising her head, she saw a kindly smile on her patron's face. "What are you laughing at?" "No offense, sweetheart," the doctor said and calmed down. "And, adults have their secrets. You're not Scott Williams' own daughter. It just so happens that way. Your mom, Mary Valentine, was a very beautiful, smart woman and very businesslike. She lived with Scott because he was a quiet man. They were very much in love once when they were young, got married. But then the love passed, and they also stayed together." Jessie didn't really understand why George Matthews was telling this, but she listened with interest. After all, this was her parents' story. And they were so comfortable. He had a well-to-do wife. She had a husband who didn't interfere with her business and personal life either. "Mary and I had an affair, you and my daughter. That's just the way it is." Jessie was silent, not knowing how to digest this news. How to even take it in. Did he know? The one who was he considered my father? She asked. The news that Michael was her brother took a back seat. Even the joy of it, she hadn't yet had time to experience. "I don't know, I think he guessed, but he loved you. He was an honest man, a husband, Mom's honest kind. That's why everything he inherited from Mary, he left as an inheritance to you. All the assets belonged to her. He had nothing to do with them and thought they were entitled to use them. But then, why did he disown me? And you too," Jessie exclaimed. No one ever gave up. When Mary died, it was a terrible tragedy for everyone and for him and me. Were we acquainted? Yes, but we never talked about it. And there was no conflict about it. After Mary died, I didn't claim you. I realized Scott couldn't do it without you. He knew he was in danger of losing you too, so he hid you so no one would ever think to look for those marginalized people in the family. Then he died, and I started looking for you, but no luck. I found out you were put in an orphanage. You ran away from there, so I looked for you. I couldn't find any trace of you. My fault. I know, come on now. I did run away myself. So you're my biological father, and your mom is Mary Valentine, and Michael's dad is Scott Williams. Well, as much as I can see, the money belongs to him. It's just going back to the rifle era with me attached. No, it doesn't. The money belongs to your mom. Scott would never appropriate it and give it to his son. It's Mary's money, so it's yours. You were her only child, and you look just like her. Wait, Michael's mother, Julia Scott, wasn't Scott Williams' wife? There's a whole story there too. Yeah, I'm telling you, they were all living their own lives. Scott was a normal man, and when things didn't work out with his wife, he hooked up with Julia. And then Michael was born. Tired, George Matthews replied. Yeah, well, the grown-ups did a lot of things to him, but I'm not judging. It happens. The important thing is that Michael and I are not brother and sister. Are we? No, we're not. So you can get married and live happily ever after. And preferably without such stories, said George Matthews. Yes, our parents have exceeded the standard for out-of-bond care because of us, because of our grandchildren. What about you? Are you not well? Jessie exclaimed, noticing how pale the doctor had turned. His face was pained. His confession must have been hard for him. Oh, daughter, let me say that word once in a while. I am ill, you see, and I thank fate that I had time to tell you what I should have told you a long time ago. And forgive us all for being so careless with our lives that we've dragged you all down. Oh, come on. You mean you're a dad? I've always wanted to say that word too. It's too bad Mom's gone. Jessie shared the news with Michael, and they were able to get married and then raise their beloved children. They didn't know much about what was going on in their parents' lives, so they never judged them or remembered the story at all. After all, they were starting their own new one, among other things. It was noticeable by the lingering pain in their stomachs. Two women were returning from the store with heavy bags. They lived in the neighborhood, and it was a long walk from the store. But that didn't upset the neighbors, who were known in town as Mrs. Jessica and Mrs. Carolyn. They had much to discuss. Mrs. Jessica began her story. Well, she came back at 3 o'clock in the morning. Stephen brought her back and picked up his granddaughter from the hospital on the way. Mrs. Caroline gasped. What kind of baby did she have? The third or the fourth? Carolyn, don't distract me. You're distracting me. Are you interested or not? Mrs. Jessica asked. Let me finish. Anyway, Stephen brought her in at 3 in the morning with her newborn granddaughter. And she has a belly, the granddaughter. Come on, did the granddaughter give birth on her own? Her belly, did she give birth? Yes, Carolyn. Mrs. Jessica exclaimed in delight. The news was out of the blue. The whole town knew the Zivanarev family. However, they did not have many residents, and everyone knew everyone. But the daughter was something of a local celebrity. At last her grandmother will stop being so uppity, said Mrs. Caroline gloatingly. She's been playing the blue-blooded girl for years. She's lived here for years, and when you look at her, you can tell she's from the city. Mrs. Jessica laughed. You don't say. She's been walking around town all her life, sticking her nose up, like she's better than us, and she's got a granddaughter herself. Didn't she leave to go to college, to study veterinary medicine? So we learned. The neighbors laughed again. Who's the father, Mrs. Carolyn asked. Mrs. Jessica waved her hand. Look for the wind in the field. What a thing to do. By the time they reached their homes, the fresh gossip had been discussed on all sides. But the women already knew that as soon as they got home and put the groceries they had bought on the refrigerator shelves, they would each pick up their cell phones and start calling everyone they knew. So soon the whole town would know about it. Jessica has loved animals since she was 5 years old. She found a sparrow with a broken wing in the street. Probably one of the local boys had hit it with a slingshot. But the bird managed to fly away from its offender and get to the lilac bushes under which the girl was playing. Jessica brought the sparrow to her grandmother. What do you have there, Jessica? Melissa asked. Instead of answering, the granddaughter held out her hands. The sparrow. Let's have a look. Grandma picked up the injured bird and carried it to her desk. She laid down an old, clean white towel, put on her glasses, and scrutinized the sparrow. Jessica had been quietly following Melissa the whole time. She knew her grandmother wouldn't send her away, but she didn't want to disturb her. Aren't you afraid? Melissa asked. No, Jessica answered boldly. Her grandmother looked at her fondly. Huge blue eyes, black hair braided into 2 pigtails. She looks just like her mother at that age, Melissa thought. She said nothing aloud, but smiled. Look, she said to her granddaughter, I'm going to take a look at him. You have to be careful. I will touch it very gently with my fingertips. See? Yes, Grandma. Well, his head, torso, and legs are intact. The left wing is intact, but the right wing is bruised. Will you fix him, Grandma? I'll do my best, honey. We'll have to fix the wing so it'll reattach. And we've got to get this poor bastard into a warm, dry place, fed and watered. You'll help me take care of him, won't you? Yes, Grandma. Jessica was happy. They got that sparrow out, as well as many other animals after it. Melissa had been a veterinarian all her life. Not in this town, though. She came here 5 years ago with little Jessica in her arms. Before that, Melissa had lived in the big city, where she ran the largest veterinary clinic for many years. She was the most well-known and sought-after specialist. So much in demand that she had no time at all to raise her own daughter. With her husband, Melissa divorced when James was only 10 years old. The husband simply could not withstand the presence of such a strong and intelligent woman. But Melissa did not care. She was all about work. And when she realized that James had grown up, it was too late. Her son had already gotten mixed up with bad company. He was hardly ever home and was dating Ricky the musician, who was 10 years older than him. When Melissa found out, James was already expecting a baby. Are you going to have a baby? You're going to have a baby? His mother yelled at him. Yes, Ricky loves me. This baby came out of love, unlike how you and Daddy had me. Melissa gasped in indignation. You're just a kid yourself. Where will you live and what will you live on? He's a penniless musician. He's talented. It's just that you don't know anything but your horses and dogs. We can manage without you. Great. Go to your musician and go. That day, James packed up and moved out of his mother's house. And a few months later, Melissa was awakened by an early doorbell. On the doorstep lay a baby wrapped in several blankets and a note: "You were right. I'm too young to be a father, and going on tour with an infant is inconvenient. If you don't want to raise him, give him to an orphanage. I don't care." When Melissa read that, it was as if something inside her broke. Over the next week, she quit her job, sold her city apartment, and bought a house in a remote village. She figured she had enough savings for the rest of her life. Melissa was determined not to make the same mistake a second time. She would raise her grandson in love and understanding. He would grow up to be a good boy, kind, gentle, affectionate. He will not throw himself at the first musician he meets, because he lacks love from people close to him. Melissa will do anything to replace his father and mother. "I want to be a veterinarian too, just like you," Grandma Lillian declared when she turned 10. Melissa smiled. "Of course, I'm very glad you want to follow in my footsteps. But there are so many exciting new professions in the world. You don't have to be a veterinarian. You can become anything you want: a teacher, an astronaut, an actress." The granddaughter shook her head. "I love animals, and I love it when they get well." Grandma thought for a moment. "Good. I'll try to teach you everything I know. But when you grow up and finish school, you will still have to go to the city, enter the university and study there for a few years." The girl listened to her attentively. "Okay, Grandma," she said with a seriousness unusual for a 10-year-old child. "I will study with you and then at the university." Melissa smiled and nodded. From that day on, she began to make contacts with the villagers. Previously, she only interacted with people out of necessity, when she needed to buy milk, eggs, cottage cheese, meat, and other necessary food and non-food items. However, when the former head of the city's main veterinary clinic realized that she would have to teach her granddaughter the ins and outs of her beloved profession, she seriously reconsidered her attitude. It became apparent to Melissa that a lot of hands-on training would be required. Just the occasional sparrow and frog won't do it, she thought. It started with a trip to the local store. Normally, the woman would try to get her shopping done quickly and go home. But this time, Melissa lingered. "I've had bitter milk for 2 weeks. Can you believe it?" She heard Paul at the counter. "Yeah. Oh, that's too bad. We've always bought from you. It was the best." "You don't say. We don't know what to do with it, even if we cut it up. But it's a pity. She's a young cow, not even 5 years old." "Did you by any chance change the place where she was grazing in recent weeks?" The women stopped talking and stared at Melissa. In 10 years, they'd grown accustomed to the strange newcomer. Although she had lived in an old house on the edge of the village for a long time, she had never done anything bad. They still called her Townie behind her eyes. Her big eyes. Lillian's granddaughter went to school with the other children and was no different from them. But her grandmother Melissa always showed that she was different. She never said hello to anyone, never talked to anyone. She never invited anyone to visit her. That's why the day when she suddenly spoke to the locals herself went down in the history of the village. "Yes," said the landlady when she had recovered from her surprise. "She ate all the grass in her usual place. And my son Paul found a new field." Melissa nodded. "Take me there." "How?" The landlady looked at her questioningly. "I rode my motorcycle here. It has a sidecar. If you're not afraid, I'll take you." "Great." When they got to the field, Melissa got off the bike and looked at the ground. "Here," she said triumphantly, clutching a blade of grass in her hand. "This is the cause of your cow's bitter milk. It's not the most common plant in these parts, but there's quite a lot of it in this clearing. Let your son Paul graze the cow elsewhere, and after a while her milk will be as sweet as before." News of Melissa's talent spread through the village in a matter of hours. The very next day, people came to see her about her sick horse. Then she was called to a neighbor whose chickens had suddenly stopped laying. Then she was asked to find out why a 6-month-old piglet had suddenly stopped gaining weight. And everywhere Melissa took her granddaughter Lillian. Strangely, but the little fragile girl was not frightened by the huge animals, nor by what her grandmother sometimes had to do with them. Yeah, toughness of spirit. You're like me, Melissa said once when her granddaughter helped her deliver a cow. Lillian looked at her in surprise. We're helping animals, Grandma, Melissa said. That's right. Lillian's education was a success. When the girl turned 15, Melissa started sending her alone for simple cases. When she realized that Lillian was doing well, she began entrusting her with more difficult tasks. Everyone in the village already knew that the girl would finish school and go to the city to study veterinary medicine. You'll come back to us later, won't you? Aunt Caroline once asked Lillian. The girl shrugged her shoulders. I guess I like it here. You should find a good husband, Aunt Caroline said thoughtfully. Lillian blushed. It was too early to think about that. The woman waved her hand. It's never too early to think about it. Stephen's granddaughter has had her second, and she's only 3 years older than you. I mean, look at my youngest, Ryan. He's a hell of a guy. Lillian didn't bother to say that he was famous for his promiscuity and even more for his bragging. I'm just thinking about school for now, she said firmly. Well, you're just like your grandmother, sighed Aunt Caroline. Stephen's been trying to hit on her for 2 years now, and she's still not getting it. They're such a loving family. Lillian thought, but didn't say anything out loud. Even though both Melissa and her daughter were respected in the village, they were still not considered completely their own. The good vets help everyone, but they keep to themselves. Melissa doesn't like to receive guests, and Lillian is unapproachable to the village boys. So what if she's a pretty girl? No, she's a pretty girl. Of course, fragile as a reed. Big blue eyes, long black hair, thick, fluffy eyelashes. But is it really worth it to play hard to get? Lillian walked to the store. Of course, it wasn't healthy to carry heavy things when you were 9 months pregnant, but they were almost out of food at home. And Grandma hadn't been feeling well lately. Age was taking its toll, after all. Of course, Lillian noticed how curious the villagers looked at her. The way the women smiled wryly when Lillian entered the store. They whispered as if she couldn't hear anything. Lillian didn't react in any way. A loaf of white bread, please, she said to Aunt Patricia, the perky little clerk who had worked in the store as long as Lillian could remember. Is she pregnant? Said Aunt Patricia. What else? A pack of matches, a pack of butter, macaroni and oatmeal cookies. I'll be right there, baby. How are you doing? Baby? Aunt Caroline's voice came from behind Lillian. I'm fine, Lillian answered calmly. How's school? The woman's voice was clearly sarcastic. I'm a correspondence student. It's fine, Lillian replied calmly. Oh yeah, who's the father? Daughter. Aunt Jessica couldn't take it anymore, she said. Thank you, Aunt Patricia, goodbye. Lillian handed over the money, took her shopping and left. She didn't dignify Aunt Jessica with an answer. What kind of girl doesn't want to come clean? Playing the innocent. We all know she's promiscuous, Aunt Caroline said at her. Aunt Jessica shrugged her shoulders. What about me? Has everyone seen her? Where's the husband? No husband. So she's out. As she left the store, Lillian wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. It's all right, she'll get over it. The stares, the conversations, the questions, not the worst of it. She could take it all. The main thing is that Grandma Melissa is on her side. Lillian got into veterinary school without any problems. She and her grandmother decided in advance that the girl would study at the correspondence department. But only for a year longer, Melissa said. You'll get the same diploma. And we need it for work. You learn the theory on your own, and I taught you everything I know. Of course, it's understandable that after all these years, a lot of new things have come up. But that's okay. If you know the basics, you'll figure it out quickly. Lillian smiled at her grandmother. You always say the most important thing is practice. Melissa nodded. And you've had plenty of it. And to make it even more, I asked one of my former subordinates to hire you at his clinic. Will you help a young but very talented doctor there, And study in your spare time? Grandma asked. Okay, Grandma, Lillian replied. Studying came easily to her. Of course, a lot had changed since Grandma had been in charge of the clinic. Veterinary science had advanced a lot, but it was still much easier for Lillian than her classmates who didn't have the same experience. Peter, her grandmother's former apprentice and subordinate, and now the director of the clinic himself, welcomed Lillian with open arms. Hello, hello, daughter. He shook her hand affectionately and invited her to sit down. In the pictures her grandmother had shown her, Peter had been a thin, short guy with funny round glasses. Now he was wide, had laser vision correction, and had grown a thick, dark red beard. How's Melissa? He asked. We were all shocked when she suddenly announced that she was quitting her position as head of the hospital and resigning. Lillian knew why her grandmother had suddenly resigned from such an important position, but she would hardly be happy if her granddaughter talked about their personal life. It's all right, Lillian said. She asked me to give you her regards and said she was very proud of you. Peter smiled embarrassedly and for a few seconds looked like the young man in the photo from 20 years ago. Thank you. That's very nice to hear, he said. I take it Melissa still prioritizes hands-on learning? Lillian smiled. That's why I enrolled as a part-time student. That's actually a wise decision, Peter said. Well, will you be working as an assistant to one of our doctors? I'm sure he'll teach you a lot. The doctor was only 8 years older than Lillian. However, the girl immediately noticed that he was respected by the rest of the clinic staff, and she liked Nicholas at first sight. Tall, blonde-haired, with blue eyes, he seemed to always be in a good mood and showed kindness to both people and animals. He took the news that he would now have a new assistant quite calmly. Well, Jessica? He said cheerfully. We'll see how you do in the field. I'll do my best, Lillian replied. Working with Nicholas was interesting. He had an easy rapport with both the animals and their owners. Lillian noticed how carefully he took a history, how detailed his examination was. It's easier with sick people, he explained to Lillian. They can tell you everything in words, but with animals we can only focus on what the owners notice. Not all of them are very observant, so you should help them to ask how the animal's behavior and habits have changed. And of course, the examination of the pet itself gives a lot. Lillian listened attentively and nodded. By the way, you are very good at manipulation, Nicholas praised her. Injections, bandages, and everything else. Where'd you learn that? My grandmother is a veterinarian, Lillian answered. She used to take me with her whenever someone in the village asked her to help. Oh, you have more experience than me, exclaimed the doctor cheerfully. Lillian smiled embarrassedly. I've been observing more only for the last 3 years. She began to trust me. Various uncomplicated cases. And in the village our patients were mostly cows, horses, pigs, chickens, goats, dogs, and cats too, but much rarer. Well said, Nicholas. We rarely have cows and chickens, but your experience is excellent. I can see that you are good at what you do. Just study hard, do well in your exams. I'll teach you the rest. He gave her a list of current textbooks and websites. That's what you have to read. Not to the fact that half of what you'll learn at the institute is already outdated, and another quarter will be outdated by the time you get your diploma. That's sad, Lillian said. The doctor shrugged. That's life. By the way, if you want, I can give you another part-time job. It is in our clinic you will perform manipulations for animals whose owners agree to bring them to us every day. Which, for example, to put IVs, shots, many do it themselves, said Nicholas. And I understand that. After all, everyone's budget is different. In this case, your task is to explain to the owner in as much detail as possible how to do it safely, painlessly, and effectively for the pet. Understood? Lillian nodded. But some owners are willing to pay for comfort and safety and trust their pet only to us. Sort of like a daycare center. There's a nurse shortage in the evening. Thank you, the girl replied. I would love to take this part-time job. Most of the people who came to the day hospital were IVs. Lillian quickly learned to find the veins and carefully placed the catheter. The owners of the animals were very satisfied. Lillian even almost became friends with one of the owners. Tara was a sweet little woman of about 36. It was immediately obvious that she was a very wealthy woman, expensive brand-name clothes, well-groomed, manicured face and nails, small purses that changed every time she visited. She had a long red cat named Puppeteer, who was dear to the mistress and her husband, about whom she constantly said. "Alex and I have been married for 13 years, she told Lillian, stroking the cat as he lay under the IV and showing her how much he disliked this pastime. "We got him the first week after we got back from our wedding trip. We came out of the store and he was sitting on the porch hungry. Small, scared. Now he looked as well-fed and well-groomed as possible, with a long, silky coat. And he's been with us ever since," Tara continued. "He's like a child to us." Lillian nodded. When she had lived in the countryside, she had been used to a very different way of treating animals. Yes, the owners loved their pets, but they were more practical. If cows got sick, it potentially threatened the family with the lack of milk, cottage cheese, sour cream, and meat that the cow was once supposed to go to. Horses were needed for transporting goods, cats for catching mice. Dogs guarded the house. Chickens laid eggs. And here in the city, animals had little practical use, but were treated almost like members of their family. At first, Lillian didn't understand it, although she loved animals herself. But gradually, talking to the owners, she realized that behind each cat, dog, parrot, there was a personal story. Kuklavad the cat was very seriously ill. He had to go on drips for 3 weeks. And since the cat was not easy, Lillian tried not to go far away during the IVs. So she got to know Tyr and her family more and more. "He is like a child to us," the owner of the ginger cat often repeated. And one day she decided to explain to the girl in detail. "My husband and I have wanted to have a child for a long time," she confessed. "We have been trying for almost 10 years, but it still doesn't work out." "I'm very sorry for you," Lillian said. "But you can still do it. Don't worry, you're so young." Tara suddenly shrieked. "No," she shouted almost desperately. "We've tried so many times. We've been tested from head to toe dozens of times. I've done IVF 7 times. Nothing works." She cried. Lillian was confused. She didn't expect that the treatment of the cat would turn into such a serious topic. But then the girl did realize and brought the puppeteer's mistress some paper napkins. "Thank you," exclaimed Tara, blowing her nose loudly. "And that rascal is so sick. He scared us." The cat didn't even flinch. Apparently, he was used to his mistress's mood swings. "Don't worry," said Lillian. "The puppeteer will be all right. And so will you." Tara sobbed a few more times, but then finally calmed down. "Thank you, daughter," she said. "You're a very good girl. I just feel better every time I come home from you." Lillian smiled. "You're very nice too." "Thank you." Tara blotted her eyes once more with her napkin and suddenly asked, "Why did you decide to become a veterinarian?" Lillian smiled. "Because of my grandmother. She ran this clinic many years ago," Lillian continued. "Wow." Yes, Tara nodded. "And then it happened that she had to raise me from infancy. So she gave up her position, bought a house in the country, and moved there with me. That's how we lived our whole lives. I like to help animals from childhood. My grandmother taught me everything she knew. Now I have to continue my education, get my diploma, and run a clinic too." Tara was already smiling. Lillian smiled back. "Well, maybe in many years," she replied. "Where is your grandmother now?" Lillian sighed. "She lives alone in the village for now. But someday I'll bring her to live with me. I'll buy us a small, beautiful, and comfortable house in the city, and we'll live there." Tara nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure, Lillian," she said, "that everything will work out." "What do you do in your spare time?" Nicholas once asked his assistant. Lillian was just finishing filling out the cards for today's 4-legged patients. "What time is it?" she asked. The doctor laughed. "I get the hint. I think I've gotten you too busy." Lillian frowned. "I don't like hints. My grandmother always taught me to be blunt about everything." "Well, that's good," Nicholas replied cautiously, not understanding where she was going with this. I'm satisfied with the amount of work I have now, Lillian explained. I sit with you at the reception in the morning, and in the evening I earn practical skills. In between, I try to study. I don't have a lot of free time. The doctor nodded. I understood that. But maybe you, Lillian, do have some free time sometimes, don't you? He looked pitifully at the girl with his expressive brown eyes. She sighed. Yes, I have this Saturday off, but I wanted to see my grandmother. I haven't seen her in 3 months and she wanted to come to town. I need to get some medicine for the animals. She still works as a veterinarian for you, unofficially, Lillian replied. There's just no one else in the village to do it. I understand, Nicholas nodded. An interesting idea suddenly occurred to him. If you want, I could introduce you, Lillian said. Nicholas hummed in surprise. That's an unexpected offer. But if my presence won't make you uncomfortable, I'll accept it. Good, Lillian said. Then it's a deal. At first, the grandmother was skeptical about meeting her granddaughter's boss. But after chatting with Nicholas for about half an hour, Lillian noticed her grandmother's face soften. It's nice to know how far science has come since the last time I worked, Melissa said. I thought in so many years I'd make my granddaughter an almost ready veterinarian. Turns out she has to start from scratch. Nicholas smiled and shook his head. Melissa, you've done a wonderful job of preparation. Believe me, if I had a grandmother like you, I'd be running a clinic today. Still, the basics of anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, disease pathology, and many other processes have not changed over time. You've also given Lillian a tremendous practical background. Melissa nodded favorably. Of course, she was pleased to hear that. She looked at her granddaughter with a smile, who smiled back at her. Well, Lillian's experience in the village is pretty specific, she said. When I first came there after practicing in a city clinic for so many years, I had a hard time too. Don't you want to go back to the city? Nicholas asked suddenly. It must be hard for you in the village alone right now, isn't it? Melissa shrugged. I've gotten used to it over the years, and she's not as old and helpless as she looks at first glance. At least the local grandfathers still come to me to ask me to marry them. Lillian laughed. That's a lot of wow, Grandma. Melissa shrugged and stood up. All right, you're young people. Have fun, she said. I've got a bus to catch. Are you upset? Lillian asked. I don't want to. It's too late to go back, said Grandma. But it's getting dark early. I'll take you to the train station, Nicholas offered. After they had seen the grandmother off, the doctor asked, Do you want me to drive you home, or can we walk some more? Lillian rubbed her eyes sleepily. I'm going home. I'm tired and I want to sleep. Don't be offended. He smiled. I'm not offended. It was nice to meet your grandmother. She really is a great woman. Lillian smiled. She really liked you too. After 3 weeks, the course of IVs ended. Nicholas examined him, carefully read the results of control tests, and announced to the owners that the cat is perfectly healthy. Of course, he is no longer a boy, said the doctor, but for his age is holding up very well. Diet, I wrote you. If anything, you know our address. Thank you very much, Nicholas said, Tara's husband. A nice, quiet man in a business suit. On Christopher's lap lay a caged treasure, which he held gently with one hand, and with the other hand he tenderly squeezed his wife's palm. Lillian suddenly turned to the girl. I have a favor to ask of you. Could you leave me your phone number? If you don't want to, I'll understand. Lillian looked at the doctor in surprise, but replied, Okay, I'll text you now. Tara called her that same evening. Lillian, I told my husband about how you took care of our kitty, and he wants to thank you. No, you don't have to, Lillian replied, embarrassed. I was just doing my job. And you helped me a lot, said the cat's owner. So please don't say no. We just want to invite you to dinner. Lillian thought that perhaps that was something she could agree to. Okay, the girl replied. Where do I have to go? What are you talking about? Tara exclaimed. Our driver will pick you up. You don't have to worry so much. Believe me, it's not hard for us. Especially since we live in the countryside, it's impossible to get there any other way. Good, Lillian agreed. Of course, she was a little worried, especially when she got into the luxurious black car with tinted windows. Hello, Lillian said timidly to the driver, a huge, pumped-up man in a black suit, who opened the door for her and helped her to get in. The man nodded without changing his expression. Why did they need this dinner, Lillian thought. A simple thank you would have sufficed. Especially since they gave me a huge fruit basket, which I shared with the entire clinic that same day. Nicholas got an expensive whiskey. I won't be as generous as Lillian and keep it, the doctor stated. Just kidding. We'll open it at the New Year's Eve party. His co-workers were outraged, but Nicholas was adamant. Where here the driver's voice sounded, breaking Lillian out of her thoughts. The man got out quickly, opened the door and gave her his hand. The girl thanked him embarrassedly. Shall I go in there? Lillian asked timidly, as they stopped in front of the high marble porch of a magnificent mansion. I'll show you out. As they walked along, Lillian was surprised to think that she hadn't realized how rich the owners were. The cat knew it was clear they had money. Surely she knew how much it cost for 3 weeks of IVs to save a cat from a serious illness. But that car, the driver, the country mansion behind the high fence. Lillian, are you here? Tara happily ran up to her and hugged her as if they were old friends, despite the posh surroundings. The woman kept herself very simple, which made Lillian like her even more. Christopher was here, too, only he kept a more reserved demeanor than his wife. He smiled at Lillian and nodded. Let's go to the dining room, he said, as his wife opened her arms. Yes, yes, of course, Tara answered him. The three of them walked into the huge dining room. Lillian looked at the long table with a white lace tablecloth, filled with many dishes of food. She felt uneasy. She turned to the owners of the house and said timidly, I'm sorry in advance, but I don't know anything about cutlery. Christopher shrugged. What's there to know? You eat liquids with a spoon and solids with a fork. And if you mean those houses where they serve 10 kinds of cutlery for every meal, that's not us. We're simple people, Christopher said, putting his arm around his wife and kissing her gently on the temple. She smiled softly and invited Lillian to the table. After a few minutes, the girl was completely relaxed. In their company, it seemed as if she was sitting with old pals. The couple talked about the cat. We decided to buy him a new scratching post, Tara said. The old one is already scary to look at. Seva and I spent a week choosing one. And this bully began to tear it the first night. I had to return the old one. Lillian smiled. There was a pause, and the girl noticed how the couple suddenly looked at each other. They clearly wanted to say something else, but it was as if they were working up the courage. Finally, Tara, squeezing her husband's hand, turned to Lillian. If we're being honest, we didn't call you here just to thank you for saving our favorite cat. Of course, that too. But our main purpose was different. Lillian froze. I'm listening to you, she said. Tara took a deep breath, and in one breath she blurted out. We're asking you to be a surrogate mom for our baby. Oh, was all Lillian could say. This is all very unexpected. Christopher entered the conversation. We realize that this is a very unexpected offer, but please don't be in a hurry to refuse. Yes, we've given it a lot of thought, Tara said, and please at least hear us out. They looked at Lillian with such a pleading look that she realized she couldn't refuse the request. I told you that we've been trying for years to have a child, Tara began, but all those attempts were unsuccessful. Her voice trembled, and her husband put his arm around her shoulders. The doctors said we're both healthy, except that my body can't carry a baby, so surrogacy is my only chance. But why did you choose me? Lillian couldn't take it anymore. You hardly know me. Tara shook her head desperately. No, I've spent enough time with you to know what kind of person you are. You're a very nice girl, Tara said. Most importantly, I trust you completely. That's probably the most important criteria for us. Christopher nodded. There's probably something I should explain. I'm a fairly public person who is involved in business, in politics. Unfortunately, we are still condemning this way of having children. So it's important for us that no one knows about it. And I trust you completely, Tara repeated. But pregnancy was not part of my plans, Lillian said. I have work, school. The couple nodded. You can continue that for the first few months of your pregnancy, Christopher replied. And then you can take a sabbatical. You don't have to be on maternity leave, so you don't have to miss much. And since you're a part-time student, you might not have to miss anything. And we'll reimburse you for missed work days, of course, Tara added. In fact, all expenses will be on us. Doctor's exams, food, clothing, vitamins, trips to the hospital, and so on. But you'll also receive a substantial financial compensation. You told me you wanted to buy a house near the city to live with your grandmother, Tara interjected. If necessary, my husband and I can help you find the house of your dreams, with full renovations, furnishings, and furniture, and a convenient commute to the city for you and your grandmother. Lillian sighed. She'd been thinking about this for a long time. Her grandmother, though still vigorous, was not as strong and sturdy as she used to be. Lillian herself was not going to stay in the village, and it was unlikely that her veterinarian's salary would allow her to quickly save up for an apartment where she and her grandmother could live. Please think about it, Tara took her hand gently. You're our only hope. It won't be for long. I don't know, Lillian sighed. This is all very sudden. Tara nodded. Suddenly tears welled up in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back. Sorry, I'll step back, she said, and walked out of the dining room. Christopher stood up. We don't want to pressure you, he said. Just think it over at your leisure. In the meantime, my driver will take you back, and please don't tell anyone about our offer. Of course, Lillian replied. She kept her word and did not tell about this conversation neither to Nicholas, with whom they had dinner after work, nor to her grandmother, to whom she went to celebrate New Year's holidays. How are you here without me? She asked Melissa. I'm getting by, she said. Of course it can be difficult, especially in winter. You know, without central heating, water supply, and a warm toilet, it's not very cozy here. Melissa noticed the upset look on her granddaughter's face and immediately corrected herself. But that doesn't mean I'm complaining. I'm still able to take care of myself. Don't worry. You never complain, Lillian sighed, noticing, as did her grandmother. After spending a few days with her grandmother, Lillian finally decided that she would accept the surrogacy offer. How much longer will Grandma be able to support herself? What if she falls while carrying water from the well, breaks a leg or catches a cold and gets sick? And in general, carrying heavy things at her age is not very healthy. I agree, Lillian said as she called Tara. Lillian, really? Yes. Oh, my girl. This is the best present my husband and I could have gotten. When can we see you? The same taciturn driver took her to a familiar house. There, Lillian and the couple discussed the terms of the contract in detail. Most importantly, you must keep it a secret, Christopher said seriously. I absolutely insist that this condition be fulfilled, even if it concerns friends, lovers, and relatives. Lillian nodded. Okay, I won't tell anyone. As we said, we'll cover all expenses, Christopher continued. But you will be required to undergo certain tests, eat a healthy diet, get plenty of rest, and get at least 8 hours of sleep. Like a vacation in a sanatorium? Tara smiled. Only we'll pay you for it. Sounds great, Lillian smiled. You'll also have a personal assistant, Christopher said. His name is Henry, Christopher said. He will drive you to the hospital, help you with shopping, and so on. Is that necessary? Lillian asked. You can call on Henry as needed, said Tara. You may not need it very often in the first few months. But believe me, it's going to get harder as you go along. And there's no reason to suffer when there's someone to help you. Okay, Lillian replied. It took several months for a full examination, after which the doctors said that Lillian was perfectly healthy and could become a surrogate mother. They succeeded on their first try. "Oh, I'm so happy," Tara exclaimed, literally crying with joy. She hugged the girl and kissed her cheeks, flooding her with tears. Christopher, as always, was more reserved, but Lillian could see that he was happy too. "It was our destiny to meet you," Tara said with conviction. "It's scary to say this, but I consider it a sign of fate that my husband got sick and it brought us to your clinic." Ryan meowed loudly when he heard his name and jumped onto Lillian's lap. He had grown accustomed to her during his visits and now considered her a member of the family. "That's a sign," Tara nodded with conviction. Lillian was glad that everything had happened so quickly. The first few months of her pregnancy had been easy, and she had only occasionally used Henry's services. "You get used to a good thing," she said as she got into his car after work. "What's on the schedule for today?" "Ultrasound, eye doctor, dentist, and neurologist," he said as he turned the key in the ignition. "Also, according to my calculations, you're running low on some vitamins, and we haven't been grocery shopping for a week." Lillian smiled. "How do you remember all this?" Henry shrugged. "It's my job, Lillian. Especially compared to my other clients, you're using me 10% of the time." "So your job is escorting surrogate mothers?" Lillian wondered. Henry smiled for the first time in a while. "My duties are a little broader than that. I just work as a personal assistant. It's interesting work, but most of the time I'm on my feet or in the car all day," Henry said. "Do you have to drive around town a lot?" Vanessa asked. He nodded. "Tell me something interesting about your job," Vanessa asked. "We still have a long drive ahead of us." Henry thought for a moment. "I worked with a woman once. She made clothes to order, but not plain clothes, but themed ones, like Chinese princess dresses from the 15th century, or an elf archer costume, or something like that." "How interesting," Vanessa exclaimed. "Yes, and then we had to go to some woodworkers who made bows and arrows, then to a blacksmith, then to some handmade embroidery." Vanessa smiled. "Well, I'm not so much fun to be with. You're nice and calm and very polite." "I've worked with surrogate mothers a couple times," Henry said. "Believe me, they made the most of that time. They'd call me at all hours of the day and night for anything." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Lillian laughed. The examinations and tests showed that Lillian and the baby were doing well. The only thing that bothered her was the slowly but surely growing belly. She didn't know what she was going to say to Nicholas, because their communication already seemed to be going beyond the boundaries of boss-subordinate communication. Lillian actually liked Nicholas very much. At first, he tried not to show these feelings. After all, she was much younger than him. And besides, she is his subordinate. After all, who is she? Nicholas tried to convince himself. Just another young, stupid girl who was hired by an acquaintance. It only took him a couple of weeks, however, to be convinced otherwise. Lillian was good with animals, had excellent theoretical and practical training, always came to work on time, filled out paperwork accurately, and listened attentively to everything he said. She was cheerful, polite, and open. Nicholas realized that it had been a long time since he had met such a pleasant person. He decided that he would try to make friends with her. No one forbade him to do that. Nicholas also liked Melissa. It became clear how Lillian had such an upbringing and strong character. And then Lillian agreed to go out to dinner with him after work. And after that evening, Nicholas realized he was in love. He decided not to hurry. To confess his feelings, he did not want to frighten Lillian. Let everything go as it was going. He would be impeccably polite and professional with her at work. And when they had a chance to meet, he would begin to gradually, step by step, reduce the distance until Lillian is ready. And things seemed to be going well for him. Nicholas could see that she liked him too. Lillian laughed at his jokes. They'd hold hands when they went for walks. And then all of a sudden, things started to change. No, Lillian still looked at him with the same tenderness as before, didn't avoid him at work. She seemed to be just as open with him, except that Nicholas could see and feel that she was hiding something from him. Lillian had some business of her own that she didn't tell him anything about. A couple of times he noticed her being picked up from work by some young guy in the same car. Nicholas knew for a fact that Lillian had no brothers or friends here, so he was tormented with jealousy. I realized she doesn't owe me anything, he thought. I haven't even confessed my feelings to her, but I think it's clear enough. And if she has someone else, why won't she tell me? A couple of times he even tried to strike up a conversation with Lillian, asking if she had someone. Lillian only laughed. Not at all, Nicholas, she said. It was at work, so Lillian addressed her boss as you. I don't have time for this, she continued. Right now I'm all focused on work and school. Nicholas could hardly contain a sigh of relief. Besides, Lillian added suddenly, I don't want to meet anyone. I already have all the people in my life that I want to socialize with. She blushed. Nicholas suddenly felt his heart hammering hard. Did I understand you? He said, hiding a smile. He decided that it would only be a short time before he would ask her to go out with him. Then he suddenly noticed that Lillian was pregnant. Lillian tried to hide her growing belly as much as she could. She was thin, so it wasn't easy. She decided to expand her work uniform as much as possible. Then she started to wear a white robe on top, but she began to think that the clinic staff suspected something. Especially the girls noticed such things. No one asked her directly. But Lillian realized that the day would come when even Nicholas would guess her situation. And she had no idea what she would say to him. Why are you so sad today? Henry asked her as he picked her up after work to take her to the doctor. It's just been a rough day, Lillian said. Henry thought for a moment. Do you mind if I give you a friendly hug? He asked. Can I do that? Yes, Lillian said. He walked over to her, then hugged her gently. Lillian sighed and hugged him back. Thank you, she said. It really did feel better. Henry smiled. I'm very glad. Now I'll help you into the car and we'll go. We can't be late. They drove off. Lillian didn't know that Nicholas had seen the scene from the study window. Except that, without knowing the context, he took it very differently. Lillian, we need to talk, he said the next day. The girl looked up at him in surprise, and she noticed that all day long the chief was not himself. But she decided that if he wanted to, he would tell her everything himself. I'm listening, Lillian replied. Nicholas walked around the office. Have you noticed that I like you? He suddenly asked. Lillian blushed. But I had that assumption, she admitted honestly. The doctor grinned. The assumption was kind of obvious. And I didn't think you were disgusted with me either. She was embarrassed. You're a wonderful boss, she said quietly, and a great friend. I'm really glad I met you. You are. And when I asked you if you were seeing someone else, you said you weren't. That's true, Lillian replied. The warden nodded. Then how can you explain your pregnancy? I didn't want to believe it until the last minute. The whole clinic has been talking about it for 2 weeks. Lillian froze. She wanted to tell the truth. But she couldn't. She couldn't let down the couple who had entrusted her with their secret. I don't want to talk about it, she said in a trembling voice. That's it, said Nicholas. Good. It's clear to me. He left the office, slamming the door. Lillian cried. The next morning, Lillian went not to the office, but to her boss. There she wrote an application for maternity leave, and after that she went to the train station to buy a ticket for the bus to the village. She was lucky because there she met a fellow villager who was also going home. When Melissa saw her pregnant granddaughter, it was as if she wasn't even surprised. Lillian was afraid her grandmother would yell at her, bringing to mind her mother, who had gotten Lillian pregnant when she was also very young. But grandmother only asked one thing. Do you want to tell me what happened? Sorry, Grandma, Lillian sighed. I can't yet. Good, know that I'm always on your side. You can stay here as long as you want. Thank you, Grandma. I promise after this baby comes out, I'll be able to tell you everything. Okay, sweetheart, I hope you realize you're going to have a hard time in the village. They don't like us enough, and now you're the only one they're going to talk about. I'm prepared for that. Did you teach me to be strong? Grandma smiled. You've always been strong, my girl. Daughter, sweetheart, why did you scare us so much? Tara exclaimed the next time they were on the phone. What's wrong? Tara asked. I'm fine, Lillian replied. I just had to leave work earlier than I had planned. I'm going to live in the village with my grandmother until the birth. Don't worry, I feel fine. I'm taking my vitamins. If it's an emergency, they'll take me straight to the hospital. It's only an hour by car. Shouldn't you move into our house? Maybe? Tara asked. Lillian smiled. You said yourself that you have to keep everything secret, and it would be suspicious if an unknown pregnant girl lived with you for a few months and then disappeared, and you had a child. Tara sighed. Yes, you're right. Then we can get you whatever apartment you want in the city. No, Lillian said firmly. I'll stay in the village with my grandmother. I feel fine. It's only an hour's drive from the city. I'll get all the tests I need. But a week before the birth, Henry will come and take you to the clinic. I won't take no for an answer. Lillian smiled again. That's fine with me. And if you need anything, call him and me any time of the day or night. Okay, Tara replied. We'll be in touch anyway. I'll be waiting for your calls with a status report. That's a wonderful idea, sunshine. Despite the fact that Lillian was telling her grandmother as if she didn't care at all, the girl was having a hard time. Most of her fellow villagers were whispering behind her back. Quietly or loudly, they were discussing her. And besides them, there were those who almost openly threw it in Lillian's face. For example, her former classmate. What's up, Zivanareva? What's up, Zivanareva? Samantha said. I walked around the whole school with my head held high and pretended that we were all lowlifes, and you were blue bloods. Samantha had hated Lillian all 11 years, but she had only been afraid of the formidable Melissa and dared not bully her classmate. And now Samantha herself had already given birth to Aunt Carolyn's son, who had once been in love with Lillian by the alcoholic Ryan. Samantha thought she had a chance to get even with her rival. I don't think so, Lillian said calmly. You've been out on the town with no one to blame. Who's the father? Continued her classmate. You don't know. Lillian didn't answer. Of course she pretended it didn't hurt her. But in fact it was so painful to listen to all the dirty gossip and whispering. It's only a little longer, she told herself every day. She was also very upset that Nicholas had never called her. She berated herself so much for not talking to him. She should have broken the pact and told him everything or left before her belly became visible. And she should have confessed her feelings, told him she understood, that she'd noticed how much he liked her and that she liked him just as much. Except now it was too late. She'd betrayed his trust. Nicholas won't forgive that. Okay, Lillian said to herself, I have to think about Grandma, and also about school, and also about the promise I made to Tara and Christopher. The delivery date was getting closer. My stomach was getting heavier and lower, and my legs were already swelling badly. By the end of the day, my back was aching and I had to pee constantly. Henry's coming to pick you up the day after tomorrow morning, Abigail said during another of her almost daily calls. I'll remember, the girl replied. I've already packed a bag. Good for you. And let's dress warmly. The weather forecast promises a blizzard in the coming days. Good, Tara. How are you feeling? I'm fine, by the way. Lillian lied. I can't believe it's so soon. I feel lighter than I did in the middle of my pregnancy. Let's hope it goes that way. It will be our best New Year's present ever. Lillian smiled. Yes, if everything goes well, you will already be welcoming the new year with your daughter. She heard Tara sigh. Oh, we're so excited, you can't imagine, Tara said. We've already got everything ready in the nursery. Yeah. Lillian spent the next 40 minutes stroking her belly as she listened to Tara and Christopher talk excitedly about setting up the room for their future daughter. Okay, honey, I'm rambling. Suddenly exclaimed the woman. You should get some rest. Have a good day and you have a good day. Lillian replied and passed out. She came out of her room and saw Melissa dressing as if she was going out. Lillian shivered at the icy draft and looked out the window. There she could already see the wind beginning to ruffle the branches of the trees. "Grandmother, where are you going?" Lillian asked. Melissa nodded and began to tighten her coat. "Yes, a neighboring farm has asked to see a breeding stallion." "And you're going out in this weather?" Grandma waved her hand away. "They'll take me there by car. Besides, they're supposed to have some fancy doctor from the city." "That's great. In that case, why do you have to go? Or are you having a concilium?" "They can't reach him. They can't get him on the phone. Maybe he can't even make it because of the snowstorm. Then it will be necessary to at least examine the animal and give him a couple of supportive treatments so that the stallion will last until the morning," Grandmother said firmly. "Lillian, you're not going anywhere in this weather." "I am." Melissa snorted. "Yeah, you're about to give birth." Lillian resolutely started to get dressed. "It won't be soon. I feel fine." "Lillian, Grandma. Who said it was quick and easy? You're such a stubborn girl, just like you." Melissa laughed. "Okay, but be careful." "Don't worry, Grandma." The blizzard was getting worse. "Are we going to be okay?" Lillian asked the son of the owner of the company who was driving her. "Yes, we still have about 20 minutes to go," he replied. "You'll forgive us for disturbing you in this weather, but the stallion is our everything. My father invested so much money in him, we had to take out a loan. If he dies, we'll go bankrupt. And our company employs so many people in the surrounding villages." Grandma Melissa told me. "Since you built the farm, many of my neighbors have jobs." "It was always my father's dream," he said simply. "He put everything he had into this farm." Lillian nodded. "I promise I'll do everything I can for your stallion." After the examination, it was clear that the stallion would live. Lillian told the owners, who breathed a sigh of relief. "I know you have a city specialist, an experienced veterinarian, coming to see you," she said. "We don't know yet," sighed the farm owner. "We can't reach him because of the snowstorm." "Okay," Lillian said. "I'm going to give him a couple of shots and record the treatment. If your doctor doesn't come, follow it." When she had finished with the stallion and was about to ask for a ride home, the farm owner said, "Oh, just arrived. The doctor can have a word. I don't remember what you said or what shots you gave." "No problem," Lillian said. She waited for the town doctor to get out of the car and come to the stables. "Where's our breeding patient?" She heard a familiar voice. Lillian's heart raced. What was this stupid game of fate? Lillian. Nicholas seemed as surprised as she was. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly. "I was examining the stallion," Lillian replied. "I forgot you lived nearby." Nicholas sighed. "Is that the local doctor they told me about?" "All right, you'll tell me all about him," he said. "It will be quicker that way. I don't want to be outside too long, it's already blizzarding." Nicholas hated to admit it to himself, but he was glad to see Lillian suddenly. How he'd missed her. Yes, he was angry that she hadn't told him about her relationship and pregnancy, but how much he missed her. And now he looked at her so familiar face, eyes, lips, and couldn't tear himself away. He wanted to spend just a few minutes with her, to hear her voice, to look into her big blue eyes. What he asked, because he'd been thinking and hadn't heard what Lillian had said. I said, "Did you examine the stallion too?" Lillian repeated to her husband. Nicholas blinked confusedly. "Of course. I trust you completely," though he added, "when it comes to work, of course." Lillian flared up but didn't answer. After examining and telling Lillian, Nicholas said, "I absolutely agree with your diagnosis and the treatment prescribed. You will make a fine veterinarian." Lillian lowered her eyes. "Thank you." Nicholas suddenly thought how much he didn't feel like going home right now. "How's the baby?" he asked, nodding at Lillian's belly. "It's fine," Lillian replied. The tentative delivery date is a little over a week away. Already. Yeah, you live here with your grandmother. Nicholas finished quickly for her. We live with her. Lillian nodded. Nicholas nodded. Would you like a ride home? He asked. I don't want Brandon to have to drive back in this weather. I'm on my way anyway. You'll have to make a detour, Lillian said. It's no problem for me. If Melissa doesn't mind, I'll have a cup of tea at your place. Lillian smiled. Thank you, Nicholas. That's a good idea. As they drove, Nicholas was filled with questions. Why had she come to the village? Where was the child's father? Who was he? He was so thoughtful that he didn't even immediately notice the change in Lillian's expression. What happened? He asked. My stomach hurts, she said. It's very tight. Well said, Nicholas. How long has it been? It started when I was examining Charlotte. I didn't notice it at first. It's been happening a lot lately, but it usually goes away in a few minutes. Now it's just getting worse. Nicholas gripped the steering wheel with his fingers. We have to go to the hospital, he said firmly. How far to the nearest one? About an hour, Lillian said. But you don't have to do that. He waved her off. Come on. It's a blizzard. There's no telling how long the ambulance will take to get to your village. I'll drive you myself. Thank you, Nicholas, Lillian said. He shrugged. It's not hard for me to do that for you. Of course, he had to pretend that everything was under control, that he wasn't afraid. But in truth, Nicholas had never been so afraid. The wind was picking up, visibility was only a few meters. He wanted to go faster, but he was afraid. How do you feel? He asked cheerfully. Normal, Lillian replied weakly. But with his side vision, he could see drops of sweat on her temples. He could hear her breathing hard, feel her teeth clenching in pain. We'll be there soon, Nicholas said cheerfully, gripping the steering wheel harder. Suddenly the car hummed strangely, and then there was a sound like a gunshot. The car jumped and began to slow down. Nicholas barely had time to turn the steering wheel before they were swept off the road. Damn it, he shouted. What happened? Lillian asked weakly. Don't worry, I'll find out, Nicholas said cheerfully. In fact, he was lying. Nicholas didn't know anything about cars. He went out rather to cool down, to breathe fresh frosty air and to understand what could be done. Opened the hood. If there was something wrong, Nicholas didn't realize it. Shit, he swore again as he closed the hood. The cable. It's cold. Gotta get back in the car. Gotta calm Lillian down. Gotta figure out what to do about this situation. Well, how's it going without me? He asked cheerfully as he came back in and closed the door tightly. Normal, Lillian replied. What's wrong with the car? I don't know, honestly said Nicholas. But that's okay, I'll take care of it. He saw the look in her eyes, so helpless, so frightened and hopeful. I'll figure it out, Nicholas said firmly. Don't worry. He unfolded the back seat and helped Lillian into it. Get comfortable, he said. Are you going to deliver the baby in the car? She asked fearfully. I hope I don't have to, Nicholas said honestly. But if anything, I can do it. I'm a doctor. Lillian smiled weakly. Veterinarian doctor, she corrected. People are animals too, Nicholas parried. Lillian laughed, but immediately cried out in pain. I'll try to call, Nicholas said. There was no connection in the car. He jumped outside, where the wind was literally knocking him off his feet. 10 minutes later, when his fingers were freezing, he finally got a connection. The ambulance promised to come as fast as it could, weather permitting. Nothing. We'll hold out. You just get us out of here, Nicholas said. He was told that everything possible would be done. How's that? He asked Lillian when he got back. It was getting noticeably cooler in the car. Nicholas took off his jacket and threw it over Lillian. I'm hanging in there, the girl replied. Except that the pains have become more intense. I think it's real." "And what?" "They're on their way to pick us up," Nicholas replied. Lillian nodded, then pressed her white lips together and suddenly asked, "Don't leave me, please. I'm so scared." "I won't, I promise." The minutes, or maybe hours, of the ambulance ride seemed like an eternity to Nicholas. When he could see the flashing lights through the blizzard, he felt a great sense of relief. All the way to the hospital, Lillian didn't let go of his hand. "It's going to be all right," he repeated and put a smile on his face. "You're a good girl. We got through it all." He was even allowed to be present during the birth. Of course, the doctors thought he was the father. He didn't explain anything, he didn't have time for that. After everything was over, Nicholas went out into the hallway. He was shaking with fatigue. Lillian had just fallen asleep. Her daughter was being carried in for a checkup. Melissa was already standing in the hallway. "How's my granddaughter?" she asked. Nicholas nodded. "She's fine. So is your great-granddaughter." Melissa raised her eyebrows. "Great-granddaughter? She didn't tell you anything?" Just 2 days before, Lillian had broken the terms of her contract and told her grandmother everything. She decided it would be too cruel if she went to the maternity ward and came back without the baby. Melissa took the news, like everyone else, calmly. "You're doing a good thing for good people," she replied. "Of course, I would have taken your baby and raised it the way I raised you," Melissa said. "But it's a good thing you didn't. You're very young. You have to study and work." The grandmother was sure that her granddaughter had told the young doctor everything. She realized that Nicholas was not just a boss and mentor for Lillian. But if her granddaughter decided not to tell him about her secret, who was she to interfere? Lillian will tell her when she's ready. "Thank you for doing all this for her," Melissa said. "I was just in the right place at the right time." "Anyone would have done that," Nicholas replied. "But you were the one who was there for her." "I'm going downstairs for coffee." When Nicholas came down the stairs, he saw a familiar man in the hall. He was asking the receptionist about something. It took the doctor a few minutes to remember where he'd seen him. Sure enough, this was the guy who had picked Lillian up from the clinic that evening. She was still leaving with him. "Well, now that the kid's father is here, I'm definitely not needed anymore," Nicholas thought grimly. "I don't know what she had with him, but it's certainly none of my business anymore." He walked out of the hospital. When Lillian came to, the first person she saw was her grandmother. She was sitting beside her bed, holding her granddaughter's hand. Then Lillian saw Henry, Christopher, and Thera. The last one was holding a small package. "How are you feeling?" Melissa asked softly. "Normal," Lillian replied. "How's the baby? Is she okay?" Tara looked up at her, her eyes full of gratitude and tears. "We've decided to name her Hillary," Christopher said. Lillian smiled. "It's a very pretty name." "Thank you," Tara said. Lillian suddenly realized that she couldn't see Nicholas. "If it weren't for Nicholas, Hillary and I wouldn't be here," she said. "Where is he, by the way?" Melissa sighed. "I saw him. I think Nicholas left." "You didn't tell him anything?" "No," Lillian replied. "I figured you'd tell him yourself, or even pressed your lips together," Melissa said. "We'll be here with you until the day after tomorrow," Tara said. "And then we'll take you home and help you pack your things." "Things?" Lillian asked in surprise. Tara raised her eyebrows. "Sweetie, you don't seem to have fully come to your senses yet," she sighed. "Remember the terms of the contract. You gave birth. We bought you and Melissa a house in the Phoenix City limits." "I remember," Lillian replied. "I just didn't think it would happen so fast." "What's the holdup?" Christopher said. "Henry had the house ready. It should be ready to live in for Christmas. It's all decorated. He'd put up the tree, put up the lights, even bought the food for the holiday table." Henry, Lillian smiled. "You're wonderful." The boy waved his hands. "I wanted to make you happy in honor of such an event. Thank you." When two large, Expensive black cars drove into town. The news spread faster than the cars could reach the house where Lillian and Melissa lived. The neighbors quickly discerned that several other people had gotten out of the cars besides the occupants of the house themselves. A young guy, obviously the child's father, an older man and woman, probably his parents, and a big man in black, either a security guard or a driver. So what's so important our Lillian got knocked up, the neighbors chattered. A deputy, I think. Or an oligarch. Probably an oil and gas trader, others speculated. Oh, Lillian's a lucky girl. I can see why she's having babies with our guys. They're carrying their stuff around? There wasn't much stuff. Besides clothes and shoes, Lillian had packed all her books and her grandmother's veterinary books. Give it up. It's all old stuff, Melissa said. It's been 100 years since the information has been out of date. Her granddaughter shook her head stubbornly. You taught me from them? It's a memory. Grandma sighed. As always, you can't be argued with. Melissa herself, in addition to her personal belongings, took some of the dishes and framed photographs that had hung on the walls for years. If you say you have everything you need to live, she said, referring to the old beds, armchairs, table and chairs, I'll leave this junk here. If you want Christopher put in, we can find movers, rent a car, and they can move every last nail. Melissa waved her hand. Don't give me that. She's sick of it. I haven't lived here as much as I've been hiding from myself for 20 years. Christopher nodded thoughtfully. I understand. And it's good that you decided to get out. I know how to see strong people. Both you and your granddaughter are strong. That's why you shouldn't sit here alone. And Lillian has no business being here. That's for sure. She's going to make a great doctor. The new house in Miami was even nicer than Lillian had imagined. It was in a new part of town. It was about 20 minutes from the center of the city. It was just as new and beautiful. How much is it worth? Lillian thought with quiet horror. But she didn't share her thoughts with her grandmother. The house had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a bath, a toilet, and 2 offices. We thought you both liked to work, Tara said. And you need your own space. Yeah, I'm a hard worker, Melissa smiled. You're going to write your memoirs, her granddaughter said. It's about time. Henry had done his best. Even the yard was festooned with garlands, colored lights winking and hanging in long, thin ribbons along the terrace. How much did all this cost? Lillian gasped. You haven't seen the inside yet, Henry smiled slyly. As soon as Lillian and Melissa stepped through the door, they both felt as if they had returned to their real home after a long absence. Everything is just as it should be, Lillian said. A blazing fireplace, soft armchairs, the lights dimmed a little. There was a tall Christmas tree in the living room, which made Lillian feel childishly excited. It's so nice, she said. It's wonderful here, Melissa said. I'm glad you like it, Henry said simply. Tara came over. She was trying to keep her voice down because little Hillary had just fallen asleep in her arms. The men will bring your things in and will leave you to it, she said. Come and rest. Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Christopher, Lillian said warmly. Thank you, daughter, Christopher said. And we invite you to celebrate the new year with us, Tara said. Lillian and her grandmother looked at each other. We accept the invitation, Melissa replied. The New Year's Eve celebration left Lillian with ambivalent feelings. She stood at the window, watching the fireworks, and couldn't believe that her life had changed so drastically in just 1 year. Of course, she didn't regret her decision. There was nothing more beautiful than watching a happy Tara and Christopher standing over the crib with little Hillary. And Lillian was even somewhat proud that she was the one who could give them that happiness. And she and her grandmother now live in a beautifully landscaped house. And Lillian knows that Melissa will no longer have to live alone, carrying firewood, fetching water from the well, heating the stove. Now Lillian can be near her beloved grandmother every day. They are together again. They are again a support for each other. Only she'll never see Nicholas again. Of course, the New Year's holidays will pass, and she can return to her studies. But it's unlikely she'll dare to go back to her old job, which means she won't see him again. She wouldn't hear him laughing when Lillian told her about an incident from her village practice, and she wouldn't see Nicholas carefully and professionally examining another cat or dog. She suddenly remembers how he drove her to the hospital through a snowstorm, how he calmed her down and tried to joke when the car broke down, how he held her hand in the ambulance, and then during labor. If she had only known then, as she fell asleep, that she was seeing him for the last time, she would never have fallen asleep. "What are you crying about, sweetheart?" Lillian did not even notice how Tara silently approached her. The woman hugged her affectionately with her small white hand. "It's all right," Lillian said. "Just remembering a good man I'll never see again." She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her dress. Tara frowned. "He's alive, isn't he? So you can still see him?" Lillian shook her head. "I'm very guilty before him, and I know he'll never forgive me or want to see me." Tara put her arms around the girl and pulled her close to her. Her pensive gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, but she asked Lillian nothing more. "3?" Melissa asked confidently. She looked at her granddaughter sternly. Lillian sighed. "Yes, Grandma, I won't be able to work there. I'll pick up my paperwork today. I know the clinic your student runs is the best in the city, but there are a lot of other good ones. I'm sure they'll take me somewhere else." "Of course," Melissa replied. "But you know that's not what I mean. You need to talk to your Nicholas." Lillian blushed. "He's not mine." She cut her off and ran to her grandmother's house. She kissed Melissa and ran out the door. Stubborn Grandma sighed but smiled. Lillian really didn't want to go into the office where she had worked under Nicholas for so many months, but there were some of her personal belongings left there that needed to be picked up. She arrived early, before the workday started, hoping to get everything in before the doctor and his new assistant came in to start the appointment. The plan had almost succeeded. Lillian had already put away everything she wanted when the door opened and a familiar male voice sounded. "Lillian." She turned around, blushing. "Hello. Sorry, I wanted to get some of my stuff. I didn't realize you'd be here so early." Nicholas frowned. "Where are you going?" "Where are you going?" Lillian took a deep breath. "I'm quitting." "Why?" She averted her eyes, unable to bear the direct, piercing stare of his brown eyes. "I don't think we should work together," Lillian said. Nicholas raised an eyebrow mockingly. "Why have I offended you in any way? I remember the last time we met. You didn't want to let go of my hand and asked me not to leave. What's changed?" Lillian got angry. "You know very well what has changed. And you've made it very clear to me. Besides, if it weren't for the circumstances, it's unlikely you'd be willingly holding my hand." She shook the bag of belongings decisively and took a few steps towards the exit. "It's been a pleasure working with you," Lillian said quickly and abruptly, as if afraid to change her mind. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go." Nicholas smiled. He stood up, blocking the way. Then suddenly he took her hand gently, looked into her eyes and said, "I know everything." Lillian thought she had misheard. "Know what? All about surrogacy? But how?" He smiled. "I got a call from an old client yesterday. I thought something had happened to her cat again. But the cat's fine." Lillian gasped. "So Tara told you everything herself?" Nicholas nodded. "She said she saw you crying on New Year's Eve and began to guess something. And then, with your grandmother's help, she confirmed her guesses. I hope they're both right. And the reason you're crying is really because of me." Lillian laughed. Whatever the situation, Nicholas always knew how to make her laugh. "Are they wrong?" he asked worriedly. "What about the mystery?" Lillian asked, ignoring his question. "They didn't want anyone to know about it, did they?" Tara said that she and her husband were so happy that they didn't care now, even if the whole world finds out that it was you who carried their child. Lillian smiled. "You didn't answer the question," Nicholas added. "Surely you can guess that I like you?" Lillian replied. And after you didn't run away from my labor and fainted, I decided to run away right after it. Lillian laughed. So now it's okay for me not to quit? She asked. Nicholas nodded. What's more, I hope that you will work with me in this clinic for many more years, first as an assistant and then as a colleague. I hope so too, Lillian said. But haven't you found a new assistant? The doctor shook his head negatively. I was waiting for you to come back. That was stupid, Lillian sighed. And it would have been nice, Nicholas continued, ignoring her remark, if you'd started seeing me. Unless, of course, you're really in love with that guy who picked you up after work. Lillian laughed. Now I see what upset you back then. No, I'm not in love with Henry. She rose on tiptoe and kissed Nicholas on the lips. He gently wrapped his arms around her, pulled her close, and kissed her back.